Hi there. Tonight, let's step into a Viking longhouse on a night. So cold your breath freezes before you can finish a sigh. Picture it. Snow crunching underfoot outside, icy wind pressing against thick timber walls, and the flicker of firelight casting long shadows across smoky rafters. You settle onto a rough wooden bench, wrapped in layers of animal skins, and the first thought that comes to mind is simple. How on earth did anyone survive this? And then, almost immediately, a sharper thought follows. You probably wouldn't have. Before we go any further, if you're enjoying this little journey into the past, I'd be grateful if you like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly resonates with you. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always a joy to see where folks are listening from around the world. Now go ahead and dim the lights. This story will carry you deep into the heart of a Viking winter night. The longhouse itself is your only shield against the Arctic chill, and even that feels tenuous. Built from heavy timber and sealed with layers of turf and mud, the hall is wide enough to shelter an entire family along with their livestock, yet drafty enough that the cold slips through every seam. As you stretch out on the rough planks, you feel the icy air crawl across your face, a quiet reminder that insulation is a luxury of our time, not theirs. Historical accounts describe these longhouses as smoky, dim, and perpetually damp, but they were also remarkably resilient against the endless Scandinavian winters. What strikes you first isn't the cold, though it's the smell. Wood smoke hangs thick in the rafters, mingling with the damp earth scent of the turf roof and the musky odor of animals penned at the far end of the hall. It's an aroma that clings to your skin, your hair, your clothes, something you carry with you whether you like it or not. Archaeologists have found timbers blackened by centuries of soot, proof that fires burned almost constantly. You can almost hear the hiss of fresh logs dropped onto glowing embers, their crackle pushing back against the deep silence of the night. Here's a well-known fact. The longhouse was a cornerstone of Viking society, sometimes stretching up to 70 feet in length, with a central hearth running down the middle. Without it, surviving the harsh Scandinavian winters would have been nearly impossible. But there are quirks, too, like how poorly ventilated some of these homes were. Guests from other regions often complained about choking on the smoke. Imagine trying to fall asleep when every breath feels like you're inhaling a bonfire. Oddly enough, some scholars suggest that this constant smoke may have unintentionally preserved the roof timbers by killing off wood-boring pests. So yes, while the smoke irritated your lungs, it also served as a kind of accidental pest control. You roll onto your side and listen. The longhouse is alive with sound. Low animal grunts, the shuffle of bodies shifting on straw bedding, a cough here, a whispered prayer there. It's nothing like the quiet solitude of a modern bedroom. This is a living, breathing space, part home, part barn, the walls groan against the wind, and you feel each gust slip through the cracks like icy fingers. And yet, despite the discomfort, there's a strange warmth in this closeness. Scholars still debate just how effective these halls really were. Some argue the turf insulation and tightly fitted planks offered decent shelter. Others insist sleeping inside was barely warmer than sleeping outside, just with less wind. Who's right? That's still up for discussion. But one thing is clear. The Vikings accepted discomfort as part of daily life. Shivering under furs wasn't a sign of failure. It was simply how things were. Close your eyes now and picture the scene. Outside, the northern lights ripple across the sky in silent, shimmering waves. Inside, your world is made of shadows, firelight, and the muffled sounds of bodies huddled together against winter's bite. The fire glows at the center of the hall, painting everything in shades of amber and smoke. Your fingers stiffen from the cold, yet you cling to the rough comfort of fur and the presence of family nearby. This wasn't luxury. It was survival. As you drift closer to sleep, you wonder what other tricks these people use to hold back the cold. The hall around you creaks under its own weight, a massive structure of timber and turf pressing into the earth. You trace the walls with your eyes, noticing how thick they are, almost smothering, as if the builders knew thin planks would never stand up to the bitter cold. These walls are layered like a puzzle, logs, clay, and sod stacked deliberately to keep the chill at bay. Step outside into the snowstorm battering the longhouse, and the contrast is striking. Inside, it may not be cozy by modern standards, but it's survivable, and in that time and place, that was often the difference between life and death. Archaeological digs across Scandinavia consistently revealed the same pattern. Longhouses built with turf roofs and earthen layers packed tightly around timber frames. This wasn't happenstance. The physical evidence buried in the ground makes that clear. The roof sloped low, allowing snow to pile up like a natural insulating blanket, while the walls leaned inward, as if the whole house were hunched down against the wind. You can almost feel the weight of that snow pressing overhead. Yet instead of collapsing, the structure actually grew warmer as the snow sealed gaps in the walls. It's a clever adaptation. You build a roof, and the sky adds insulation for free. Still, living inside one of these houses wasn't romantic. The interior was dim, cramped, and streaked with soot from countless fires. Yet it was precisely this design, the turf, the logs, the way the house sat low in the landscape, that allowed families to endure Arctic nights. Most modern visitors would likely complain within an hour, shivering and coughing. But to the Vikings, this was comfort. And here's a curious twist. Similar turf house designs persisted well into the modern era in places like Iceland and the Faroe Islands. In fact, Icelandic farmhouses were still being built with thick turf layers as late as the 19th century. That's not nostalgia. That's sheer practicality. Now, you pull your cloak tighter and run your fingers along the inner walls. They aren't smooth. They bulge where turf and mud were packed in, and flake where smoke has charred them black. The air carries a faintly sour note from trapped moisture, but this was simply life. These walls didn't just enclose space. They breathed, absorbing dampness and slowly releasing smoke through the roof. Did it really keep things warmer than a basic timber shack? Some specialists say yes, comparing the turf to modern insulation. Others argue the benefit was minimal, and that real warmth came only from the fire itself. And there you lie, still wondering which side has it right. The soundscape adds another layer of reality. You hear the groan of beams under the weight of snow, the occasional drip of melted ice from the roof, and the dull thud of wind shoving against the turf siding. With no windows to speak of, your other senses sharpen. You rely on your ears, your nose, and your skin to tell you what's happening in the dark. The walls don't just stand still. They seem alive, creaking, breathing, sheltering, and barely holding back the northern night. It's worth remembering that these structures weren't meant to last forever in the way we think of buildings today. A longhouse might stand for a generation or two, maybe longer if carefully maintained, before the wood rotted or the turf broke down. But for that time, it gave a family and their animals a fighting chance against winters that would otherwise be unsurvivable. Most experts agree that the sheer size of these houses, some stretching over 60 feet, was part of the heating strategy. More people and livestock inside meant more body heat. And the house didn't just block the cold, it trapped that warmth. And here's a detail to give you pause. Some excavated sites show longhouses dug slightly into ground, using the earth itself as insulation. You lie back and imagine the walls not rising from the soil, but sinking into it, the cold wind sweeping just over the roofline while the ground cradles you in a damp, muffled quiet. It's not glamorous, but it's efficient. That small design choice may have saved countless lives. Historians don't always agree on how comfortable these houses really were. Some argue they were chronically smoky and cold, barely fit for habitation, and that survival depended more on thick fur clothing than on architecture. Others point evidence of carefully planned airflow systems, suggesting the Vikings understood ventilation better than we often give them credit for. Without written manuals left behind, the truth drifts somewhere between these views. And so you lie there under the turf roof, breathing in the mix of warmth and smoke, wondering which interpretation feels closest to reality. As you settle deeper into this imagined longhouse night, you notice again the communal rhythm of the space. The house was never empty. The thick walls made it feel like a fortress, but it was the people inside who made it a home. Children's whispers, animal snorts, the steady breathing of your neighbor. These sounds bounce off turf and timber, weaving together into a lullaby of survival. In a world where snowstorms could erase entire villages, the longhouse stood like a womb, protective, close, and fiercely alive. One thing is certain. The Viking longhouse was never about luxury. It was a compromise with nature, simple in form, yet layered with purpose. It absorbed snow, trapped heat, muffled wind, and sheltered both human and animal life under one roof. You might wrinkle your nose at the idea of sharing a smoky room with goats and cows, but to the Vikings, that meant extra warmth. And as you lie there, your mind drifts to the sheer effort it must have taken to build such a place, log by log, turf by turf, just to survive another winter. Picture this. Trees felled with iron axes, heavy blocks of turf hauled through snow, layers of mud packed tight, all in biting cold that never lets up. Just the act of raising a long house speaks volumes about the people who built it. Their endurance wasn't just admirable, it was necessary. Their stubbornness wasn't pride, it was survival. You can almost imagine them mid-labor, already feeling a flicker of warmth in their bones, not from the sun, but from the knowledge that every log stacked and every sod laid was a shield against the coming winter. Outside, the wind still screams across the landscape, but within these thick walls, its rage is muffled. The long house creaks and sighs like a weary giant settling in for the night. The fire sputters in the center of the hall, its smoke mingling with the damp breath rising from the earthen floor. It's not comfort as we know it. There's no soft bedding, no thermostat to dial up the heat. But for the Vikings, this was the razor-thin line between life and death. And as your eyes grow heavy, you begin to understand the quiet brilliance of their approach. They didn't try to conquer the cold. They simply outlasted it. The glow of the central fire becomes your whole world. It's more than a source of warmth. It's the very pulse of the longhouse, the axis around which everything turns. Every Viking night spiraled outward from that flame. Without it, the hall would fall silent, swallowed by frost and darkness. You stretch out on your bedding and feel the heat wash over you like a tide. Too close, and your skin prickles with sweat. Too far, and your toes stiffen in the creeping chill. The fire is generous one moment, cruel the next, always unpredictable. It gives life, but demands respect. Archaeologists have found long troughs of scorched earth running down the center of excavated longhouses, evidence of open hearths that sometimes stretched the full length of the hall or were broken into segments. One thing is certain. Fire sat at the heart of Viking life, quite literally. From it came heat, light, and the means to cook. Without that flame, no one would have eaten, slept, or survived the night. Yet there's a tender detail hidden in the sagas. Fires were often carefully banked with ash before bed, smothered just enough to keep the embers glowing until morning. Picture a Viking kneeling in the dim light, gently covering the coals with gray ash like tucking in a child, preserving warmth like buried treasure, ready to be coaxed back to life at dawn. It's the ancient equivalent of hitting snooze, ensuring the house would wake with a soft glow. But living with fire meant living with danger. A single spark leaping from the logs could ignite straw bedding or a woolen cloak. One stray ember, and the entire longhouse might go up in flames. The smell of scorched fur or burnt fabric was likely familiar. Some experts even suggest that the very length of these hearths made them more hazardous. The bigger the fire, the greater the risk. And yet, night after night, people lay down beside it anyway, because the alternative, freezing in the dark, was unthinkable. As you shift in your imagined spot on the floor, you notice how uneven the warmth really is. One side of your body basks in the fire's embrace, while the other shivers in drafts sneaking under the door. This push and pull was a daily reality for Viking families. Get too close, and you choke on smoke or wrist burns. Drift too far, and you curl tighter, pressing against others just to catch the faintest edge of heat. Scholars still debate how these fires were managed. Some argue for raised stone borders to contain the blaze, while others point to flat, open hearths with no barriers at all, with so little stonework preserved in many sites. The truth remains elusive. You're left to imagine it either way, a neat, glowing channel or a wild scatter of embers spitting sparks into the dark. Listen closely, and the sound of the hearth come alive. The sharp crackle of dry wood, the softest as sap bursts under heat, the occasional low thud as a log shifts in the flames. These noises ripple through the hall, blending with the steady rhythm of breathing from those sleeping nearby. In a world where winter nights stretched endlessly, that fire wasn't just physical warmth. It was a lullaby for the mind. And though oil lamps or torches may have been used occasionally, the fire remained the only true source of light. Imagine navigating a crowded, shadowy hall by a single strip of flame. The walls flicker, shapes twist and dance. And to a child waking in the night, those shadows might easily become spirits. In that half-lit world, the line between the supernatural and the everyday blurred, and from it grew the sagas of gods, ghosts, and heroes. Interestingly, not all longhouses had just one hearth. In Greenland, archaeologists uncovered halls with multiple fire pits, perhaps serving different families or functions within the same space. Picture it. Several small worlds glowing under one roof, each family huddled around their own fire, islands of warmth in a smoky sea. But with more fires came more smoke. Early longhouses had no chimneys, so the smoke rose, pooled under the rafters, and slowly seeped out through gaps in the roof. The upper air grew thick with soot, blackening beams after just a few winters. Visitors often describe Viking interiors as dim and choking. Some scholars even believe people slept low to the ground, not just for warmth, but to stay beneath the densest layer of smoke. It's a strange irony. The very thing that gave life could also make you cough and weep through the night. And yet they endured it. You lie there, tears streaking your cheeks, throat raw from smoke, but still you cling to the fire's edge. Was it worth it? Every Viking would have answered without hesitation. Yes. There's also a deeper layer to consider. Some researchers suggest a hearth wasn't just practical, it was sacred. Household gods or protective spirits may have been believed to dwell within the flames. Tending the fire, feeding it wood, banking its embers. These weren't just chores, but acts of devotion. Imagine a mother whispering a quiet prayer as she places another log on the fire, trusting that flame to guard her children through the long, cold hours until dawn. Now picture the rhythm of the whole night shaped by that glow. The fire dims. Someone stirs, adds wood. Smoke thickens and slowly clears. The hall drifts back into uneasy sleep. The cycle repeats again and again until the first gray light of morning slips through cracks in the roof. You never sleep deeply in a longhouse. Instead, you hover between waking and dreaming, your body tuned to the fire's every breath. And so, as you settle closer to that imagined flame, you come to understand its paradox. It is both protector and threat, comfort and suffocation. Without it, you wouldn't see another sunrise. With it, you pay in smoke, danger, and restless nights. But for the Vikings, this balance wasn't hardship. It was simply life. The longer you stay in that smoky hall, the more you notice the strange dance of the air. One moment, smoke curls lazily upward like gray ribbons. The next, it surges down, stinging your eyes and throat. You cough, pull your cloak tighter, and realize ventilation was a hidden puzzle of Viking design. Too much airflow and you freeze. Too little and you suffocate. There was no perfect solution, only constant adjustment. Archaeological finds show simple roof vents, narrow slits along the ridge, sometimes covered with movable boards or turf that could be shifted with the wind. You can almost see a weary Viking nudging one into place, muttering at the smoke that refuses to rise. The system was basic but clever, just enough draft pull smoke skyward, while keeping precious heat inside. Still, the blackened rafters and soot-caked timbers tell the real story. Smoke lingered. It coated everything, soaked into clothes, and left every longhouse smelling like a bonfire that never quite went out. Many researchers now believe this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a chronic health burden. But again, the Vikings accepted it, because in their world, the fire wasn't optional. It was life itself. Imagine breathing that air every night of your life. Eyes stinging, throat raw, lungs tight with the grit of ash. The walls kept out the wind, yes, but the fire filled your chest with smoke. It clung to your clothes, your hair, your skin. And yet, in the midst of that discomfort, some experts point to unexpected advantages. The constant haze likely kept biting insects at bay during warmer months. Flies, mosquitoes, gnats, all driven off by the acrid air. Smoke may have even slowed bacterial growth in food storage areas, helping supplies last longer and keeping livestock healthier. It's a strange trade-off. Your body ached from coughing, but your pantry stayed safer, your animals stronger. Survival, it seems, often came wrapped in paradox. The sensation of lying in that smoky haze becomes almost visceral when you let yourself sink into it. Your skin prickles from the sting in the air. Your hair carries a scent of wood smoke, like a second skin. Every shift of the draft tugs at your awareness. Ventilation becomes an obsession. Is the wind shifting? Should you widen the smoke hole in the roof? Do you dare risk losing precious heat for a clearer breath? These weren't abstract concerns. They were nightly calculations that decided whether your family spent the hours coughing or shivering in silence. Scholars still debate how effective those smoke holes really were. Some argue they worked well enough, especially when paired with natural gaps in the walls. Others insist they were little more than token gestures, barely easing the suffocating conditions inside. With no intact Viking roof surviving to the present, the question remains open, lingering in academic circles like the smoke itself. You're left to picture the constant tug of war. Heat escaping through the roof, smoke pressing down from above, people shifting restlessly under their furs, caught in the middle of an impossible balance. And then there's the unsettling truth that the smoke didn't just drift away. It settled layer upon layer, until roof beams were nearly lacquered black with soot. In some excavations, archaeologists have scraped away centuries of hardened residue, revealing timbers darkened by generations of fires. If those walls could speak, they wouldn't whisper, they'd wheeze. Yet even this soot may have served a purpose. Some researchers suggest it acted as a natural sealant, protecting wooden beams from insects and rot. What looked like pollution might have doubled as preservation. You can almost see Viking builders not understanding the chemistry, but noticing, season after season, that their roof beams held strong. Survival sometimes came by accident. Now listen more closely to the sounds inside the hall. A child whimpers softly, eyes watering from the sting of smoke. A goat coughs faintly in the far corner. A man rises, shuffles the hearth, and pokes at the embers, stirring the fire and the smoke along with it. Every movement disrupts the fragile calm. There's no deep, uninterrupted sleep here, only the fitful rest of bodies learning to adapt to air that always tastes of flame. Even the sagas hint at this hardship, with passing references to characters lying in smoke or cursing the black haze that clung to the rafters. The language itself remembers the discomfort, and yet, over time, people grew used to it. Just as we today tune out the hum of traffic or the glow of streetlights, Vikings learned to breathe through the smoke, cough, roll over, and drift off again. It was simply the price of warmth. There's also a psychological dimension to this smoky world. In the dim, flickering haze, shadows dance across the walls, rafters looming like giants, corners shifting with unseen movement. A mind half asleep, eyes burning, could easily conjure spirits, ancestors, or wandering gods in those shapes. Folklorists suspect this environment helped feed the Norse imagination. Many myths are steeped in twilight imagery, in veils of mist and shadow, perhaps born right here in the firelit, smoke-choked dark. In that sense, choking on smoke might have also meant breathing life into story. The paradox remains. The smoke hole was a lifeline, yet never quite enough. The cold demanded the roof stay sealed. The fire demanded it open. Every night, families walked at razor's edge, adjusting, coughing, enduring. And as you nestle deeper into your furs in this imagined hall, you realize you, too, are part of that ancient negotiation. Every breath is a reminder. Warmth never came free. Your back aches on the hard floor. So you shift and discover another secret of Viking nights, the raised sleeping platforms. These weren't beds in any modern sense. No carved posts, no feather mattresses. Just simple benches built along the walls, wide enough for a family to sprawl across. Sometimes just rough planks or woven branches topped with straw. But compared to sleeping directly on the damp earth, they were a revelation, offering not luxury, but survival. Archaeologists have found clear traces of these platforms in longhouse excavations. Post holes lining the walls, discolored earth where once rested, even compressed layers of decayed straw. The consensus is strong. These benches were standard. Sleeping off the ground served two vital purposes. It lifted you above the chill rising from the soil, and it kept you out of reach of pests and scavengers. It's the kind of adaptation that seems obvious in hindsight, but only because others learned it through frozen nights and hard lessons. Picture yourself climbing onto one of these benches. You're lifted just a foot or two off the ground, and already the difference is clear. The floor below is dark, damp, uneven. But here, air circulates. A thin layer of straw softens wood beneath you, and heavy animal skins drape over your shoulders. Musky, warm, alive with the scent of the herd. This simple ledge might be the thin line between shivering all night and slipping into uneasy sleep. And these benches were more than just places to rest. Often they doubled as storage. Tools, food, even weapons were tucked beneath them. Your iron axe resting just below your head, winter turnips hidden from curious goats. It wasn't about convenience. It was about making every inch count. How many shared a bench? As many as could fit. Sagas and historical parallels suggest whole families piled together. Children nestled between parents, servants, or relatives, squeezing at the edges. Privacy was a luxury no one could afford. Warmth came first. Your neighbor's elbow might jab your ribs. Their snoring might rattle your bones, but their body heat kept you alive. Scholars still argue over the exact size of these platforms. Some reconstructions show narrow ledges, barely wide enough for one. Others imagine broad, continuous benches stretching the length of the wall, more like communal sleeping shelves than individual beds. With only fragment of evidence, the truth remains partly guesswork. But whether cramped or spacious, the feeling is the same. You climb up, the wood creaks under your weight, you settle into scratchy straw that smells faintly sweet, and you're never truly alone. Above, snow presses down on the roof. Beside you, someone shifts in their sleep, mutters, and presses closer. You're surrounded not just by people, but by the shared rhythm of survival. One excavation in Denmark uncovered layers of charred straw bedding, evidence that sparks sometimes leapt too far and set the sleeping platform smoldering. Imagine waking to the smell of your own bedding burning beneath you. Did families leap up in panic? Or did they simply smother the embers with a cloak and lie back down, too exhausted to care? The char remains don't say, but they remind us how fragile this balance was. With the hearth blazing just feet away, the benches also created a kind of thermal hierarchy. Warmth rose, smoke hovered, and those on the platforms occupied a middle zone. Not freezing on the floor, not choking near the rafters, but somewhere in between. It wasn't perfect air, but it was survivable. A compromise carved into the very architecture of the home. And beyond function, these sleeping spots reflected social order. Benches closest to the fire were likely claimed by elders or high-status individuals. Less desirable corners went to servants, guests, or the young. Where you slept spoke volumes about who you were. Think of it as a Viking version of a seating chart, enforced not just at feasts, but every single night. So as you settled deeper into your imagined place on the bench, wrapped in furs, surrounded by the soft sounds of breathing and the crackle of fire, you understand. This wasn't just a house. It was a living system, imperfect, smoky, dangerous, and deeply human. Every breath, every cough, every shared inch of warmth was part of a delicate dance with the elements. And in that dance, the Vikings didn't just survive, they built a world. As you settle into your imagined bedding, you feel a quiet mix of gratitude and discomfort. Gratitude that you're not lying directly in the mud, with cold seeping through your bones like a slow poison. Discomfort because you're wedged between relatives, straw scratching your skin, and sparks from the fire popping just a little too close for peace of mind. This was a Viking bed. Rough, smoky, deeply communal, and utterly necessary. It wasn't a luxury suite by any stretch. But when winter howled outside and the world froze solid, it was enough. Enough to rest. Enough to survive. And as your eyes close in the flickering firelight, you understand a quiet truth. Survival didn't always mean conquering the cold. Sometimes it meant finding the smallest edge against it. A plank, a layer of straw, a place just one step above the earth. Run your fingers across your bedding, and you realize it's not just random piles of rough material beneath you. There's a system here, born of hard-won experience. First, a base layer of dry grass or reeds, refreshed whenever the family could spare the time or resources. On top of that, thick woolen blankets, and finally, the most precious layer of all, heavy animal skins. These were the Viking equivalent of duvets, dense, warm, and rich with the musky scent of sheep, reindeer, or goat. Forget lavender and linen. Survival smelled like pasture and hide. Archaeological digs have turned up fragments that confirm this layered approach. Charred straw, tufts of sheep wool, even goat hair woven into cloth. The sagas may speak of heroes and gods, but everyday life clung to these humble materials. Wool, in particular, was the unsung hero of Viking comfort. Scandinavian sheep were tough, thick-fleeced creatures, and their wool had a near-magical ability to trap heat, even when damp. Long before modern synthetics like Gore-Tex, this natural fiber kept bodies warm through endless winters. You might itch under its rough weave, but your bones would thank you for it. And then there's another layer to the story. Literally, not all bedding was local. Some furs traveled astonishing distances. Bear pelts from the far north, beaver skins from the east, even luxurious reindeer hides from Lapland. To sleep beneath such a cover wasn't just about warmth. It was a quiet declaration of status. Imagine tucking yourself under a pelt that had journeyed hundreds of miles, a tangible symbol of your family's wealth, connections, or success in trade or raid. Bedding, in this light, became more than functional. It was a statement. Lean closer and feel the reality of it. The straw beneath you crackles and scratches. The wool itches. The fur drapes heavily across your chest, dense and warm. Together, though, they form a cocoon against a draft that slipped through the turf walls. Without these layers, the cold would creep in relentlessly, stiffening your joints and stealing your sleep. With them, you might actually drift into dreams, fitful, smoky dreams, but dreams nonetheless. Scholars still debate the finer points. How thick were these bedding piles? Were furs used as underlays or top covers? Did you lie on fur and wrap yourself in wool, or the other way around? The physical evidence doesn't give clear answers, so the discussion continues. And with it comes the unspoken truth. No matter how you layered it, fleas were probably part of the package. Wool and fur made excellent homes for pests, and insect remains found in Viking burials confirm that nightly itching was just part of life. It's almost humorous. A warrior who braved icy seas and raiding parties, yet lay awake cursing the tiny creatures in his blankets. Survival was never glamorous. Then there's the smell. Wool carried the earthy tang of lanolin. Furs held the musk of the animals they once clothed. Mix it with wood smoke, damp earth, and the faint sourness of stored food, and the longhouse had a scent all its own, raw, honest, alive. Did the Vikings even notice? Probably not. Anthropologists suggest that humans quickly adapt to their environments, what we might find overwhelming. They simply knew as home. One charming detail lingers in the sagas and folklore. Bedding was sometimes blessed. A mother might whisper a prayer over a fur laid across her child, invoking Thor or Freya for protection against the spirits of cold and night. In this way, blankets weren't just physical shields. They were spiritual ones, too. To wrap yourself in fur was to wrap yourself in safety, both practical and sacred. Think of the rhythm of these nights. You shift on crinkling straw. Tug a woolen cloak higher. Feel the weight of fur pressing you gently into the bench. The air still bites, but your own body heat builds beneath the layers, turning discomfort into something close to relief. In that moment, survival doesn't feel heroic. It feels ordinary. Just another night endured. Just another dawn waiting beyond the snow. And so you close your eyes, sinking into this nest of grass, wool, and hide, the simple technology of survival. No silk, no feathers, just the quiet ingenuity of making do with what the land and sea provided. And despite the itch, the pests, the heaviness, you sleep. Because in the Viking world, that was enough. But then you notice something different about the fur across your chest. It's heavier than local wool, softer than straw, and undeniably foreign. This isn't from the sheep grazing outside, or the goats bleating in the corner. This pelt has traveled. Its texture hints at beaver, maybe even bear, animals not native to your farmstead. And that realization opens a window into a much larger world. Viking bedding wasn't just local resourcefulness. It was part of a vast web of trade. From the snowy north came reindeer and fox pelts. From the forests of the Baltic and Russia came beaver, sable, and marten. These weren't just warm. They were status symbols. Owning an imported pelt meant your family had reach, influence, perhaps even silver from distant lands. Fur was a cornerstone of Viking commerce, tribute from conquered territories, coveted goods traded as far as the Middle East. Fragments of Arabian silver coins found in Scandinavian soil tell the story. Furs moved south, silver moved north. And some of those furs didn't just line cloaks. They lined beds, softening the harshness of the night. There's even a quirky footnote. Medieval sources mention northern traders exchanging reindeer hides not just for iron or tools, but for dairy, buckets of milk, or wheels of cheese. Picture a Viking farmer hauling home a prized reindeer pelt, earned by trading goat cheese, and spreading it proudly over his family's sleeping bench. Survival stitched itself together from unexpected bargains. Reindeer hides, in particular, were legendary for insulation, so effective they're still used in modern Arctic expeditions. Imagine a Viking child crawling beneath one, feeling its supple weight, cocooned against a draft sneaking through turf walls. For that child, warmth had journeyed across frozen wilderness to reach them. How common were these imported furs in everyday homes? Scholars still debate it. Some argue they were rare luxuries for chieftains. Others believe trade was so extensive that even modest households might own one for the harshest winters. The evidence is scattered, leaving the truth somewhere in between, neither commonplace nor entirely elite. But regardless of frequency, the symbolism mattered. Furs whisper a connection of a world beyond the village. To sleep beneath one was to say, quietly, into the smoky dark, we belong to something larger than this hall. Close your eyes now. Feel your shoulders sink into the softness. Your body heat seals in, held by layers more efficient than anything local wool could offer. Around you, others murmur in sleep, perhaps envious of your fur, perhaps comforted by their own. The fire flickers. Smoke curls toward the rafters. Outside, snow piles higher against the walls. You are wrapped not just in warmth, but in the long threads of trade, raid, and travel that wove the Viking age together. Silver coins crossed seas. Beaver pelts changed hands in forest clearings. Caravans moved through snowbound passes. And all of it, every mile, every bargain, every risk, ends here, in this longhouse, where you finally relax enough to drift into uneasy dreams. Even sleep, it turns out, was part of a global story. The furs may itch. They may carry a faint, earthy musk, but they also carry the breath of distant lands. And in the heart of a Scandinavian winter, that was a kind of magic. The kind that could mean the difference between shivering awake every hour and finally sleeping through until dawn. You shift under the heavy hides and suddenly become aware of just how crowded this space really is. The Longhouse isn't a quiet, private retreat for a single nuclear family. It's a hive. The benches along the walls aren't neatly arranged with personal space in mind. They're packed with bodies jumbled together. Grandparents, parents, children, servants, maybe even a traveling guest or two. Everyone shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee, breath mingling in the smoky air. The very architecture demanded it, with walls thick enough to blunt the wind but interiors limited by timber and turf. The best way to stay warm was to share everything, air, furs, sometimes even the same blanket. Archaeologists studying Longhouse remains often point out their sheer scale, some stretching 20 or even 30 meters in length. That wasn't vanity or craving for empty space. It was necessity. Multiple family units, sometimes 3 generations or more, lived under one roof. The Longhouse wasn't so much a home as a micro-village pressed into a single, smoky wooden shell. One saga casually mentions 3 households sharing the same hall. And now, as you try to roll over without elbowing someone in the face, you can almost feel the press of all those bodies. The benefits were brutally practical. More people meant more heat. A dozen bodies lying close together created a microclimate of shared warmth. In an age with no double-glazed windows, no central heating, only a flickering hearth and drafty turf walls, this collective body heat was a survival strategy. You might not have enjoyed sleeping next to your grumpy uncle or the servant who hadn't bathed since autumn, but their warmth might be the reason you woke up at all. Folklore even hints at strategic sleeping arrangements. Children tucked between adults like living hot water bottles, cousins and grandparents forming a human wall against a drafty doorway. The longhouse became less like a bedroom and more like a living blanket. Each body another patch stitched into the quilt of survival. But this closeness came at a cost. Privacy, as we understand it, simply didn't exist. Every cough, every muttered complaint, every restless turn was broadcast to the entire hall. Arguments couldn't be whispered. Intimacy had no curtain. And yet, for the Vikings, this wasn't oppressive. It was normal, what modern sensibilities might call suffocating. There's called life. Scholars still debate how this constant proximity shaped social bonds. Did it forge extraordinary cooperation? Families learning patience because they had no choice but to endure nights nose to nose? Or did it fuel simmering tensions, as hinted in sagas full of feuds and betrayals? Both views hold truth. And you, lying on your scratchy straw mattress, might agree with either, depending on whose knee just jabbed your back. Close your eyes now, and let the sensory storm wash over you. The warmth of shared bodies, the mingled smells of sweat, wool, smoke, and damp earth. The symphony of snores layered like a chorus across the hall. Somewhere, a baby fusses. Elsewhere, a dog growls softly in its sleep. This isn't serene silence. It's a living, breathing cacophony. And yet, within that noise, there's comfort. You are never alone. Excavations reveal another subtle detail. Sleeping benches were sometimes built at slightly different heights, perhaps marking one family space from another's. Imagine shallow ledges stepping up along the wall, each kin group claiming their tier. These arrangements weren't just about warmth. They reflected hierarchy. Whose bench sat closest to fire? Whose was banished to the drafty and near the door? In the longhouse, even where you slept spoke volumes about your place in the world. Silent politics played out every night beneath the rafters. As you settled deeper into this imagined hall, you realized something vital. The longhouse wasn't designed for the individual. It was built for the group. Survival wasn't a solo act. It was communal, noisy, often uncomfortable, but profoundly human. You shared not only stories and meals, but your very body heat night after winter night. And in that closeness, sweaty, smoky, undeniably cramped, there was also security. If danger came, if a storm tore the roof, if illness struck in the dark, you weren't isolated. You were surrounded, woven into the fabric of kin. In the Viking world, that closeness might have been the warmest thing of all. You stir in the smoky dark, and the warmth you feel doesn't just come from your family pressed against you. It also rises from something larger, heavier, breathing steadily at the far end of the hall, behind a low wooden partition or a simple fence. Animals shift in their pens. Cows, sheep, goats, sometimes even pigs. They share the roof not by accident, but by design. To modern ears, it sounds unbearable, but to the Vikings, it was one of their most effective heating systems. Archaeological evidence is clear. Longhouses were consistently divided into sections, one end for people, the other for livestock, often separated only by a waist-high wall. Troughs carved into the floor, post holes for pens, layers of compacted manure still preserved in the soil. This wasn't speculation. These halls doubled as barns. When winter came, animals weren't left outside to freeze. They became roommates, their bodies radiating heat that seeped across the hall like a slow, steady tide. Close your eyes and imagine it. The thick, pungent scent of hay and manure blending with wood smoke. The soft shuffle of hooves. The low, rhythmic breath of a cow on the other side of the partition. At first, it seems overwhelming. But then the warmth reaches you. Subtle, constant, undeniable. Each animal became a living radiator. Modern science tells us a single cow emits hundreds of watts of body heat. Multiply that by a small herd, and you've got a natural furnace. The Vikings didn't measure it in watts, but they knew its value. Livestock weren't just future meals. They were winter partners, their every exhale helping to keep human lungs from freezing. Sagas and later folklore even joke about it. Characters tease for sleeping with cows. The humor reveals a shared understanding. It was necessary, if not exactly pleasant. You might pull your cloak over your nose and mutter about the neighbor's goat bleeding all night. But when the blizzard howled outside, you'd be grateful for every warm breath drifting over that partition. Scholars still debate how strictly the animal and human zones were separated. Some reconstructions show neat pens. Others suggest goats could wander perilously close to your bedding if you weren't careful. With no intact interior surviving, the truth remains partly imagined, but whether orderly or chaotic, one thing is certain. The Longhouse was never quiet, never sterile, never clean by modern standards. The animals change more than just the temperature. They shape the rhythm of sleep, the soft chewing of hay, the sigh of a cow settling down, the sudden bleat of a startled sheep at midnight. These are the soundscape of Viking nights. Children may have found comfort in them, lulled by the steady pulse of animal life. Adults might have cursed them. Either way, sleep was never silent. Some researchers even suggest the manure itself contributed warmth as it decomposed, a slow, smelly release of heat from the far end of the hall. It sounds absurd, but decomposition does generate warmth. Was it enough to matter, or just an unfortunate byproduct? The debate continues, leaving you to wonder if those stinking piles actually help keep a child's toes from turning blue. Beyond heat, keeping animals inside offered another kind of security, protection. In a world where wealth was measured in livestock, losing a cow to wolves or thieves could mean starvation. So you and your goats endured the same smoky air, not out of sentimentality, but survival. You guarded them. They warmed you, a partnership written in breath and bone. And so, as you sink deeper into your furs in this imagined longhouse, the warmth around you reveals its layers. The fire flickering at the center, your kin breathing heavily on the benches, the animals exhaling steadily from the far end. The entire hall becomes an ecosystem of shared heat, imperfect, pungent, alive. You may wrinkle your nose, but you also sigh with relief, because in the frozen north, every warm breath counts, no matter who or what it comes from. The night stretches on, and you realize something striking. No one here expects to sleep through 8 uninterrupted hours. Sleep in a longhouse isn't a block of time. It's a series of dozes, stirred by fire, by animals, by the shifting bodies around you. You drift, wake, shift, drift again. Not rest as we know it, but endurance woven into the rhythm of the night. And in that rhythm, you find not just survival, but a deeply human way of being together in the dark. That idea that sleep should be a single, uninterrupted block belongs to your modern clock, not the Viking world. In the longhouse, rest came in pieces, often in shifts shaped by the fire, by chores, and by the unpredictable rhythm of life itself. You stir at midnight, eyes fluttering open to see someone quietly poking at the embers. Another figure slips outside into the cold, boots crunching on frost. And in that moment, it dawns on you. Sleep here is communal, yes, but also staggered. Written sources and comparisons with other pre-industrial societies suggest that segmented sleep was common long before electric light. People often slept for a few hours after dusk, woke for a stretch in the middle of the night, then drifted into a second sleep before dawn. There's good reason to believe the Vikings followed this pattern too. After all, the hearth demanded attention. The fire needed feeding. Smoke holes had to be adjusted with the wind. Animals required checking. In the deep, endless dark of a Scandinavian winter, waking at odd intervals wasn't a disruption. It was part of survival. Picture it now. Half the hall is lost in slumber, snoring softly under furs, while shadowy figures move through the haze. One kneels by the fire, laying a fresh log onto glowing coals. Another leads a restless goat outside, muttering curses into the freezing air. A third simply sits on the edge of their bench, wide-eyed, gazing into the flames, perhaps thinking, perhaps praying, perhaps just listening to the night. Sleep here isn't absolute. It's fluid, like a tide ebbing and flowing through the hours. This rhythm is echoed in the sagas themselves. Midnight moments appear not as intrusions, but as natural pauses. Characters awake, speaking, reflecting, even arguing in the dark. These weren't anomalies. They were part of the expected texture of night. For Viking families, nighttime wasn't a solid block of unconsciousness. It was a shared, shifting landscape of dozing, waking, tending, and dreaming. And then comes a quieter image, a child stirring in the dark, tugging a parent's sleeve, whispering, "Tell me a story." It's in these in-between hours, when half the hall is awake and the fire crackles low, that the sagas themselves may have been born. What better time to pass down tales of gods, giants, and sea raiders than in the hushed stillness between first and second sleep? Voices would carry softly over the embers, weaving myth into memory, heroism into heritage. Of course, scholars debate how consistent this pattern really was. Some argue segmented sleep was nearly universal before artificial lighting. Others caution that much of the evidence comes from later periods or different cultures. Did Vikings follow this rhythm every night, or only in winter, when darkness swallowed the sun for weeks on end? The truth likely lies somewhere in a gray space between certainty and educated guesswork. But the practical demands of fire tending, animal care, and communal life strongly suggest that nights were rarely spent in one unbroken stretch of slumber. Now imagine yourself waking from a dream. Your body is warm beneath layers of fur, but your chest tightens with smoke. You cough, sit up, and see someone else already awake, eyes reflecting the firelight. There's comfort in that silent acknowledgement. The night isn't something you endure alone. You toss another log on the coals, maybe whisper a quick prayer to Thor or Freya for protection, then ease back down, waiting for sleep to return like a slow tide. This rhythm meant Viking nights were never silent. They were punctuated with life. The scrape of wood on stone, the creak of benches as someone shifts, the soft sigh of a cow settling back into sleep. Even stepping outside for a moment of relief broke the monotony. Your breath fogging in the air, your eyes catching the swirl of the aurora overhead before you hurried back inside, cheeks stinging from the cold. These small interruptions stitched themselves into memory, turning each night into a woven fabric rather than a blank void. Think about how this changed the very experience of time. In the Longhouse, darkness wasn't a void to be endured. It was a canvas stretched across shifting hours. People moved in and out of wakefulness like fish in a current, guided not by clocks, but by tasks. Feed the animals, stoke the fire, tell a tale, drift off again. You settle into that rhythm yourself. First sleep, waking moments. Second sleep, breathing with the hall, rising and falling with its pulse. The modern fantasy of quiet, private, uninterrupted night dissolves. In its place is something richer, messier, more human. A communal tide of warmth, watchfulness, and fragmented dreams that together form a kind of wholeness. The night deepens. Your body rests, but your ears stay alert. True silence never comes. Instead, the air hums with overlapping sounds, a chorus of human and animal life echoing through smoky beams. You hear it all. Murmured prayers, soft lullabies, the rumble of snores, the groan of timber under snow load, the wet cough of someone whose lungs are thick with soot. For a Viking, this was a soundtrack of sleep. Archaeologists can't dig up sound, but the sagas and ethnographic records offer echoes. After the evening meal, as families settled onto their benches, someone might recite a verse, a fragment of saga, a boast from a recent raid, a tale of Odin's cunning. These weren't performances for an audience. They were bedtime rituals, ways of filling the liminal space before sleep. In a chieftain's hall, the stories might be grand, of battles and divine tricks. In a farmer's home, they might be simpler. Lullabies hummed to fussy children, or whispered warnings about trolls in the woods. Either way, stories were stitched into the night as firmly as the straw beneath your back. But once the voices faded, another sound rose to fill the dark. Snoring. Dozens of bodies packed together. Cloaks pulled tight, airways clogged with smoke and exhaustion. The noise must have been extraordinary, a symphony of rattles, wheezes, and thunderous exhalations. Ethnographers studying traditional Scandinavian farmhouses well into the 19th century describe them as barns of sound, where silence was a myth. You lie there now, pressed between relatives, and a snore from the bench across the hall vibrates through your bones like distant thunder. Some sagas even joke about it. Characters mock for their bull-like snores, as if the whole hall suffered equally. The humor survives because it was so universal. Snoring wasn't just common. It was inevitable in a room full of smoke-weary lungs and shared air. You might curse your neighbor's rattling throat. Then remember your own family teasing you for the same just last week. And then there were the animals. Cows shifting in their stalls. Goats bleating softly in their sleep. Pigs grunting mid-dream. every sound amplified in the echoing wooden shell of the hall. Some scholars suggest this constant animal murmur was oddly comforting, a living proof that the herd, the family's wealth and lifeline, was safe for the night. Others argue it was maddening, a relentless reminder that you were sleeping in a barn as much as a home. Both are probably true, depending on whether you'd just been woken by a goat's midnight sneeze. Now listen again to the fire. As logs burn down, they pop and hiss, sending sparks snapping into the gloom. The hearth itself is restless, a companion that never lets the room fall fully quiet. Sometimes, the collapse of a log wakes a light sleeper, who shifts sighs and in turn stirs someone else. The sound ripples outward like a stone dropped in water, keeping the night perpetually alive. Modern readers often imagine sleep as a private, serene escape, a retreat from a world. But for Vikings, it was anything but. Sleep was social. You didn't just close your eyes. You sank into a soundscape woven from every voice, every breath, every rustle of fur and straw. Privacy was a luxury drowned beneath the steady hum of life packed tight within timber walls. Did they find it exhausting? Or, having never known true silence, did they drift into slumber with ease, soothed by the familiar symphony of shared existence? One thing is certain, the sagas are full of evenings rich with speech. Heroes exchange boasts. Women sing. Children listen wide-eyed. Noise wasn't just tolerated. It was expected. It was part of the rhythm of home. And so the shift from spoken tales to snores felt seamless, a continuum of voices passing from conscious to unconscious. You might smile, lying there in the dark, imagining the same lungs that sang praises to Thor an hour ago now rumbling like a storm in slumber. In that sound, in that closeness, in that imperfect, smoky, breathing hall, there was not just survival, but community. Not just rest, but belonging. And perhaps, in the end, that was the deepest kind of warmth of all. Scholars continue to discuss how the constant sounds of the Longhouse shaped Viking culture. Some argue it fostered resilience. If you could sleep through goats bleating, uncles snoring, and sparks popping from the hearth, you could endure anything the world threw at you. Others propose it deepened storytelling traditions. With so many hours spent awake in the dark, tales became more than entertainment. They became the glue of community identity, passed down in hushed voices between bouts of sleep. The evidence leaves room for both interpretations. And as you lie there in the smoky hall, listening, you sense that both are true. Let your ears fill with that imagined chorus. The steady rhythm of breathing, the creak of the roof under snow, the soft cry of a child stirring in their sleep, the low rumble of a cow settling into the straw. Together, these sounds weave a lullaby, harsh, perhaps, but deeply comforting in its familiarity. You realize that for a Viking, sleep wasn't escape from the world. It was immersion in it, a nightly surrender to the noisy, smoky, beating heart of the Longhouse. As the hours crawl on, you come to understand that warmth wasn't only about fire, furs, or bodies pressed close. It also came from within, from what you ate before lying down. The Viking diet was rich in grains, meat, and dairy, dense, slow-burning foods that stoked the internal furnace of the body. A belly full of barley porridge or roasted mutton generated a steady warmth that carried you through the coldest nights. Without it, even the thickest reindeer hide wouldn't be enough. Archaeological studies of Viking latrines, middens, and cooking pits paint a vivid picture of what sustained these long winter nights. Coarse barley and rye bread, thick pea and bean soups, stews of lamb or pork, and, always, dairy. Milk, cheese, skyr, and butter weren't just staples. They were edible insulation. You can almost taste a bowl of honey-sweetened barley gruel, heavy in your stomach, radiating warmth as you curl into your straw bedding. And here's a curious detail. Animal bones unearthed from Viking sites often bear cut marks and signs of marrow extraction. Marrow, a calorie-dense, fatty treasure, was likely a prized midnight snack. Picture a child gnawing on a roasted bone before bed, greasy fingers tucked under furs. Not glamorous, but practical. That fat burned slowly through the night, fueling warmth long after the fire dimmed. Yet researchers still puzzle over how evenly such foods were shared. Did wealthier families feast on meat, while poorer households survived on thin gruel? The evidence suggests yes. Some graves reveal diets rich in animal protein. Others show mostly plant-based remains. That means in the same village, one family might drift off full and warm, while another lay awake, cold and hungry, just walls apart. You can feel the difference in your own imagined body. With a full belly, your limbs grow heavy, your core radiates heat, and sleep comes easily. Without food, every draft bites deeper, every shiver sharper. It's no wonder that winter feasts, especially around Yule, were so vital. They weren't just celebrations. They were survival rituals, filling bellies at the year's coldest turning point. Picture the scene. After a stew simmers all evening over the central hearth, families settle onto their benches, stomachs full, warmth spreading from within. Even the animals benefit. Fed hay and kitchen scraps, their own digestion adding to the hall's collective heat. Sleep arrives more easily when hunger isn't gnawing at your ribs. Saga literature adds a colorful touch. Heroes are often described devouring enormous meals before collapsing into deep, snoring sleep. One tale boasts of a man eating an entire side of beef before bed. Likely exaggeration, but it reflects a cultural truth. Eating well meant sleeping well, and both signaled strength and vitality. Still, historians debate how much diet alone could fight the cold. Some insist calorie-dense food was essential in subarctic climates, acting as internal insulation. Others argue that without proper wool and fur, even the best-fed body would freeze. The truth probably lies in the balance. As you chew your imaginary barley loaf, you feel both sides. The warmth spreading from your core, yes, but also the draft sneaking under the door, reminding you that food alone isn't enough. Now someone passes you a drinking horn, brimming with ale. The warmth of food is one thing, but the warmth of drink is another. Vikings brewed beer, ale, and mead not just for feasts, but as part of daily life, even in the quiet struggle to stay warm at night. One swallow sends a flush to your cheeks, a quick tide of heat through your chest. For a moment, the cold seems banished. Archaeology confirms it. Brewing vats, fermentation pits, and residue on pottery show alcohol was ever present. Everyday ale, made from barley or oats and flavored with herbs, was common. Mead, honey wine, was rare but treasured. These drinks were caloric, mildly intoxicating, and above all, warming. That fleeting sensation of heat was enough to help weary bodies drift off beneath smoky rafters. But there's a contradiction you can almost feel even now. Alcohol dilates blood vessels, creating a false sense of warmth while actually accelerating heat loss. Modern science warns that drinking before bed in freezing conditions can be dangerous. Did the Vikings know this? Not scientifically, but they surely noticed the effects. Some waking sweaty and chilled, others shivering more deeply after a horn too many. Still, in a world where cold was a constant enemy, the immediate comfort often outweighed the hidden risk. Sagas preserve the humor in it. Men drinking too deeply, then passing out on benches, or worse, too close to the fire. Imagine being roused at midnight to drag a tipsy uncle away from smoldering embers before his cloak caught flame. These stories survive because they were familiar, even routine. Yet alcohol wasn't mere indulgence. In a calorie-scarce winter, a horn of ale could be as nourishing as a small meal. Honeyed mead, thick and sweet, delivered quick-burning fuel. You imagine lying down after such a drink, warmth coursing through you, dreams arriving faster, softer. Scholars still debate how widely alcohol was consumed nightly. Some argue ale was the everyday drink, safer than questionable water. Others note that grain and honey were valuable, so households likely rationed carefully. The archaeological record supports both. Lavish feasting halls with meat aplenty, and modest farms where a single horn was shared on the coldest nights. The sensory impression is vivid. The tang of fermented barley, the sweetness of honey on your lips, the gentle dizziness as you sink back into your furs. Around you, voices grow louder, laughter rises, then softens into snores. The drink blurs the edges of discomfort, the press of bodies, the sting of smoke, making the night feel more bearable. But risks remained. Drink too much, and you might oversleep your turn tending the fire, stumble into the animal stalls, collapse too near the flames. Folklore even carries warnings, tales of those who drank deeply and never woke, frozen in their cloaks. Indulgence, these stories remind us, could end in disaster. So as you settle beneath your woolen cloak, warmed by stew, mead, and share breath, you recognize the double edge of Viking drink. It comforted, it sustained, it lulled, but it also left you vulnerable in the coldest hours. Your head still swims faintly from the mead, but as you roll onto your side, you notice something simple and telling. The woolen cloak you wore all day hasn't been folded away. It lies across you now, doubled as a blanket. In the Viking world, clothes weren't just garments. They were armor against the cold by day and by night. When the fire faded and snow pressed down on the roof, cloaks and tunics became bedding. Archaeology confirms this. Graves and bogs across Scandinavia have yielded remarkably preserved woolen textiles. Thick twill weaves, tablet-woven borders, coarse homespun cloth. Sheep were central to survival, not just for meat and milk, but for fleece that could be spun into endlessly useful fabric. Historians agree, without wool, Viking life in the north would have been far harsher. Wool possessed a near-magical quality. Its fibers trapped heat even when damp, a lifesaver in a climate where snow melted into every seam and clothing rarely stayed dry. You pull your day cloak tighter, its rough texture scratching your skin but also sealing in precious warmth. These cloaks weren't decorative like later medieval fashions. They were practical slabs of fabric, fastened at the shoulder with heavy brooches, designed to resist wind outside and double as coverlets inside. In some high-status graves, cloaks were even lined with imported furs. Wool on the outside for durability, fur on the inside for insulation, a layered defense, stitched not for show, but for survival. And so, wrapped in wool, full of stew, faintly buzzing for mead, you drift deeper into the rhythm of the longhouse. The fire crackles. Someone coughs. A goat shifts in its stall. You are not alone. You are part of a living system, fed, clothed, sheltered, and surrounded. Survival here wasn't heroic. It was ordinary. And in that ordinariness, shared food, shared sound, shared warmth, there was a kind of quiet magic. The kind that carried people through the longest, coldest nights, one breath, one bite, one story at a time. To sleep under such a cloak was to wrap yourself in both local craft and global trade, a quiet testament to how fashion and survival walked hand in hand. You picture yourself pulling it over your shoulders, the wool rough against your chin, the fur lining soft and warm against your skin. But what about ordinary people? Did every farmer, every thrall, have access to such layered comfort? Scholars still debate this. Some argue that wool cloaks were nearly universal, though the weave, thickness, and quality vary greatly. Others insist that the finest textiles were reserved for the wealthy, while poorer folk made do with thinner, coarser cloth, padding their bedding with extra straw or salvaged skins. The archaeological record doesn't give a clear verdict, so you're left to imagine the spectrum. Chieftains cocooned in dense, fur-lined wool, while servants huddled under threadbare wraps, their breath visible even beneath layers. Beyond cloaks, everyday clothing rarely came off at night. The idea of sleepwear didn't exist. Instead, tunics and trousers stayed on, day garments doubling as nighttime armor against the cold. Textile finds from graves and bogs confirm this. Heavy wool tunics, sometimes belted, sometimes simple pullovers, clearly worn for both labor and rest. Think of it, sleeping fully dressed, boots off, but everything else intact, not a habit but necessity. Every stitch was a defense against drafts that slipped through cracks in the turf walls. Folklore adds tender detail. Women sometimes loosened their woven shawls or headscarves at night and draped them over their children as extra blankets. Imagine a mother, weary from the day's work, gently laying her own head wrap across her toddler's small frame, an impromptu quilt spun from care and scarcity. These weren't luxuries. They were acts of survival, using every scrap of fabric available. Now close your eyes and feel it, while scratching your neck, heavy across your chest. The faint, oily scent of lanolin still clinging to the fibers. Your tunic itches against your arms, but the warmth it traps is undeniable. The cloak above you blocks the chill seeping through the walls, and for a moment, you breathe easier, grateful for the stubborn, resilient heat of sheep's fleece. Cloaks carried meaning beyond warmth. In sagas, a warrior gifting a cloak to a companion wasn't just sharing fabric. It was a gesture of loyalty, protection, even intimacy. That same cloak might later become shared bedding in the longhouse, its threads now woven with symbolism. Loyalty turned to warmth, honor turned to survival. You wonder if the person beside you once wore their cloak into battle, and now it covers you in sleep. Historians also puzzle over how often these garments were washed. Evidence suggests rarely. Wool's natural oils repelled water and dirt, so cloaks might go months without laundering. That means the one warming you tonight likely smells of smoke, sweat lanolin, and the musk of long days. But to the Vikings, that wasn't filth. It was a scent of home, familiar, grounding, alive. And fabric was never wasted. A cloak worn proudly at a feast by day became a shared blanket by night. Worn-out pieces were patched, repurposed, stuffed into bedding, or used as padding. There were no bed sheets in the modern sense, just multi-purpose textiles that shifted roles seamlessly. The line between clothing and bedding didn't just blur, it vanished. A tunic that reeked of sweat and smoke by day kept you alive when the fire burned low at night. Each fiber whispered of summer pastures, of women spinning by firelight, of looms creaking in smoky halls. Every thread was survival made tangible. So you settled deeper, the wool pressing down, fur brushing your chin. You don't think of luxury, you think of endurance. And as you drift towards sleep, you realize, in the Viking world, warmth didn't come from fresh linens or down comforters. It came from the very clothes you lived in, worn, reused, and shared, woven tight against the cold. Then you blink awake in the dim glow of dying embers and feel a small body press firmly against your side. It's no accident. In the Viking world, children were often placed in the middle of the sleeping bench, not for convenience, but as a deliberate survival strategy. The smallest, most vulnerable bodies were tucked between adults, insulated on both sides by living warmth. It was a Longhouses version of central heating. Children positioned like precious coals, kept alive by the fire family. Archaeology echoes this. In Viking graves, children are sometimes buried alongside adults with shared textile remnants, fur, wool cloaks, suggesting they slept this way in life. Intertwined, protected, shielded by older bodies. Soil stains and post-hole patterns reveal benches wide enough for several sleepers, with smaller imprints nestled between larger ones. The layout speaks clearly. This wasn't about privacy. It was about survival through proximity. Close your eyes and imagine it. Your child curled into your chest, hair smelling of smoke and wool, tiny hands tucked under your cloak. On your other side, another child leans against your partner, legs press against yours. The adults form a living cocoon, a human wall against a draft that snake under the door. Any parent today would recognize the instinct to keep little ones close. But here, it wasn't just instinct, it was necessity. Without that shared body heat, a child might not survive the night. Saga literature offers subtle confirmation, occasionally hinting at children occupying the middle place in bed-sharing arrangements. While rare, these references align with the physical evidence. The Vikings knew the cold showed no mercy, and so they stacked the odds by stacking their families together. Later Scandinavian folk practices add another layer. In some regions, children reportedly slept crosswise, perpendicular to the adults, so more small bodies could fit on a single bench. Picture it. A row of adults stretched lengthwise, children nestled across them like rungs on a ladder. Chaotic? Perhaps. But it maximized warmth, turning a wooden platform into a woven grid of shared heat. Not all historians agree on how widespread this was. Some see a long, continuous tradition. Others caution it likely varied by household, region, or bench size. The evidence is fragmentary, but in the smoky, drafty reality of the Longhouse, the logic feels undeniable. You can feel it even now. The cold bites less when bodies pile close. And there's an emotional truth here, too. Children drifting to sleep with a parent's heartbeat in their ear, lulled by the steady warmth of family. Adults resting easier, knowing their little ones were shielded not just by furs, but by flesh and blood guardianship. In a world where child immortality was tragically high, that nightly closeness must have offered deep, wordless reassurance. Yet comfort never erased discomfort. You shift under your cloak, and a child's knee jabs your ribs. Another tosses in their sleep, smacking your nose. The benches were narrow, the space crowded, and peace was constantly punctured by elbows, snores, and restless limbs. Still, parents accepted it, because the alternative, letting a child sleep at the edge, exposed to icy drafts, was unthinkable. One haunting discovery in Norway adds a poignant note. A child's grave contained a miniature fur blanket, carefully folded. Was it symbolic? A representation of how the family had tucked their little one in each night? We can't know for sure, but it suggests that bedding for children carried special weight, both practical and spiritual. In a world where every degree of warmth mattered, protecting the young wasn't just care, it was devotion, stitched into every layer of wool, fur, and love. To keep a child warm was to keep the family line alive. The thought sharpens as you place yourself there, in the heart of the longhouse at night. You feel the weight of furs pressing down like a second skin, the twitching warmth of the child's body curled against yours, the steady rise and fall of their breath creating a small, shared pocket of air beneath the covers. It's stifling at times, damp with sweat, thick with a mingled sense of smoke, wool, and lanolin, yet undeniably comforting. This is more than sleep. It's a cocoon woven against a freezing dark outside. From a social perspective, these arrangements bound families tighter than any oath. Modern ideas of separate nurseries or private bedrooms didn't exist. Sleep was a shared endeavor, and in that closeness, love and dependence deepened, but so did the awareness of fragility. You could almost imagine a parent lying awake in the smoky dark, hand resting lightly on a child's chest, feeling each breath, whispering a silent plea to Thor or Freya, "Let us all wake at dawn." Scholars still debate how this nightly intimacy shaped Viking parenting. Some anthropologists suggest it forged unusually strong intergenerational bonds, grandparents, parents, and children all pressed together, sharing not just warmth but stories, fears, and dreams. Others argue that constant closeness, combined with poor sleep and crowded conditions, may have frayed tempers and fueled tension. But regardless of interpretation, the architecture left little choice. The cold enforced intimacy as surely as the thick turf walls held back the wind. Now let your mind sink fully into this scene. The wooden bench creaks under the combined weight of your family. Children stir in their sleep. Adults shift, adjusting cloaks. Someone rises to stir the embers, and for a moment, the fire flares, casting flickering light over a heap of flushed, sweaty, exhausted faces. And yet they're alive. That's the truth of Viking nights. They weren't serene escapes from hardship. They were quiet battles, fought with warmth, with bodies, with bonds, renewed every dusk until dawn. And so, as your eyes close again in this imagined hall, you accept the discomfort because you understand its purpose. Children in the middle, adults on the edges. It's a geometry of survival, a nightly pattern written into the very benches and bedding. When morning comes and frost still grips the world outside, you'll rise knowing that huddling together made all the difference. The longhouse stirs again, but this time the sounds carry a softer rhythm. Murmurs, whispered laughter, the rustle of cloaks drawn tighter. You realize that intimacy itself was part of surviving cold nights. Love and marriage in the Viking age weren't just social contracts. They were nightly pacts of warmth. To lie beside a partner wasn't only companionship. It was a physical buffer against drafts that slipped through cracks in the walls. Archaeology can't preserve affection, but it does reveal shared graves. Couples buried together, sometimes with furs or cloaks draped over them, as if tucking them in for one final night. Combined with saga references, this suggests that sleep and partnership were deeply entwined. Marriage wasn't just about lineage or inheritance. In the dead of winter, it was about having someone to press against when the fire burned low. You pull your imaginary cloak tighter and feel the warmth of another body beside you. In a hall where privacy was scarce, couples carved intimacy in whispers beneath shared furs. Was it comfortable? Hardly. Children snored nearby. Goats shifted in their pen. Smoke stung your eyes. But in a world with no private chambers, this was the only pocket of closeness to be found. And it mattered. Saga literature underscores this. The marriage bed wasn't just a place of rest. It was a site of honor and household order. Who shared a bench with whom spoke volumes about status, alliance, and trust. Placement dictated who slept near the fire, who was pushed toward the drafty door, and who was welcomed into the inner circle of warmth. One telling detail lingers in historical memory. In some traditions, the wedding ceremony itself ended not with private retreat, but with the bride being led to the marital bench inside the longhouse, often in full view of the household. Imagine the whole family watching as the couple's sleeping place was formally established, everyone fully aware that the same bench would later serve as their shared shield against the cold. Romantic seclusion wasn't the goal. Practical survival was. Scholars remain divided on how much privacy Viking couples actually had. Some argue the crowded conditions left little room for seclusion, suggesting intimacy was simply part of the open rhythm of communal life. Others propose that hangings, animal skins, or woven cloth strung from beams might have offered modest separation. The truth likely varied. Wealthier halls made at small nooks. Poorer ones offered none at all. But the sensory reality is easy to conjure. You and your partner curled tightly together, limbs tangled, cloaks overlapping. Between snores and coughs, you whisper words meant for no one else. Around you, the long house hums with life. But in this small space, you create a pocket of heat that is both physical and emotional. There's tenderness here, even amid hardship. Picture a farmer pulling his ruffled cloak over both himself and his wife before closing his eyes. Or a woman tugging her fur closer around her husband after he's fed the fire, rewarding his vigilance with warmth. These small, nightly acts were as essential as any saga-worthy deed, for they carried families through winters that would have crushed them alone. And intimacy wasn't limited to spouses. In households with widows, unmarried adults, or servants, bed-sharing often crossed lines of romance and kinship. An elderly grandmother might sleep beside her granddaughter, not just out of affection, but because their combined body heat kept both alive. A servant might be folded into the same bench as children, filling gaps in the human wall against the cold. Boundaries blurred because survival demanded cooperation over propriety. Medieval Christian chroniclers, scandalized by northern customs, sometimes wrote that they lie all together in their huts with no separation of man and woman. While likely exaggerated, such complaints hint at a reality that shocked outsiders. Viking intimacy wasn't hidden behind stone walls. It was audible, visible, woven into the shared fabric of the hall. For the Vikings themselves, this lack of seclusion may have bred resilience. Couples learned to treasure quiet moments, not in silence, but amid the thrum of goats, children, and crackling flames. Love here wasn't dependent on perfect settings. It was rooted in presence. Specialists still question how this environment shaped Viking ideas of marriage. Did constant visibility foster loyalty and transparency, or did it breed jealousy and tension? The sagas offer both. Tales of devoted couples weathering storms together, and stories of betrayal whispered in the same smoky dark. The ambiguity fits. The longhouse was both shelter and pressure cooker, magnifying every bond and every fracture. Now imagine yourself lying there, cloaks overlapped, furs pressing you close, smoke stinging your eyes, a child coughing nearby. But then your partner's hand brushes yours, and for a moment, the cold doesn't matter. Intimacy in this world isn't measured in roses or candlelight. It's in shared warmth, whispered words, and the simple, steadfast act of holding on through night. In the end, that's what love looked like in the Viking longhouse. Not grand gestures, but the nightly ritual of shielding each other from drafts, sharing heat, and finding connection in the crowded, smoky dark. Survival was communal. But within that crowd, couples still carved their own fragile circle of warmth. The fire is quieted again. You shift on the bench, feeling the prickly weight of straw beneath you. That's when you notice another quiet ritual that mattered more than anyone admitted: refreshing the bedding itself. Straw mattresses weren't permanent fixtures. They were fluffed, turned, and sometimes replaced entirely. Without that effort, the material beneath you would rot, flatten, and swarm with fleas and mold. Keeping straw fresh wasn't just about comfort. It was hygiene, survival, and a point of household pride. Archaeological digs have uncovered thick layers of straw mixed with ash, animal hair, and food scraps in long house floors, evidence of bedding spread in layers and renewed seasonally. Straw, insulated against the damp earth, offered a little cushioning and absorbed some of the grease and grime of daily life. But left too long, it turned foul, sour with sweat, damp with spilled mead, crawling with pests. Imagine trying to sleep in that. Medieval sources outside Scandinavia even mention the phrase, shake down the bed, meaning to fluff and refresh straw bedding with fresh stalks. Viking households likely did the same, though without ceremony. It was just another task in the endless work of staying alive. Feed the fire, check the animals, tuck the children in, shake out the straw. Every act, however humble, was a stitch in the fabric of warmth that held the Longhouse and its people together to the longest, coldest nights. You picture a woman in late autumn dragging armfuls of golden straw into the Longhouse, spreading it thick across the sleeping benches, laughing grimly as she says, "This'll be brown and broken by spring." And she's right. Straw was never meant to last. It was a temporary shield, a seasonal compromise between comfort and survival. Here's a quirky detail that lingers in the folklore of Northern Europe. In some traditions that survived well into the modern era, fresh straw was laid down during midwinter festivals like Yule. It wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. To lie on new straw at Yule meant welcoming the turning of a year, inviting good fortune, and ensuring the next few months of sleep wouldn't be unbearably itchy. Was this custom rooted in the Viking Age? Scholars can't prove it definitively, but the echoes are strong enough to feel tantalizingly close. Now, let your senses take over. You roll onto your side and the straw beneath you crackles, stiff stalks poking your arms, rustling like dry whispers in the dark. The smell is faintly sweet, earthy, a welcome contrast to the heavier musk of furs and the lingering tang of smoke. Fresh straw has a quiet comfort all its own, clean, rustic, alive. It sounds almost like the field it came from, wind through grass, harvest underfoot. And yet, you're also aware this is the same stuff your goats chewed during the day. You're sleeping on last summer's bounty, now repurposed as your nightly armor. But even with care, straw didn't last. Families likely replaced it multiple times a year, whenever the itching became unbearable, or the stench of old sweat and spilled mead turned sour. Archaeologists have found layers of ash deliberately scattered in bedding areas, probably used to dry out dampness or kill pests. Imagine sprinkling gray hearth ash over your bench before laying down fresh straw, a strange, smoky housekeeping ritual that blurred the line between remedy and residue. Scholars still debate whether straw was universal. A few elite burials have revealed traces of feathers or finer fillings, hinting that the wealthy might have enjoyed softer alternatives. But for most farmers, thralls, even modest chieftains, straw was a staple. It was cheap, abundant, and, for a while, just comfortable enough. Think of it as a mattress of the masses. It scratched, it rustled, it flattened, but it kept you off the bare, bone-chilling planks. Refreshing the straw also created a rhythm in household life. Children hauled bundles in from the barn. Servants spread them evenly. Elders shook out cloaks before laying them down again. Every step was communal, another thread in the web of shared survival. Neglect the bedding, and everyone would itch, cough, and complain. Keeping the beds livable was as vital as tending the fire or feeding the animals. Imagine the soundscape when the straw was new. The hall filling with a crinkling chorus of bodies settling in, benches groaning softly under shifting weight. Over weeks, the noise would fade, straw flattening into silence, dust settling into every crevice, until fresh bundles arrived and the rustling sleep song began again. Small as it seems, this rhythm marked time, tying daily life to the turning seasons. But there was another constant enemy: pests. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs thrive in the warmth of the Longhouse. Entomologists studying Viking-age graves have found fossilized flea remains and lice eggs clinging to preserved hair and textiles. One excavation in York, a major Viking settlement, unearthed combs thick with lice and bedding layers rich in flea droppings. This wasn't occasional discomfort. It was universal. Warriors, farmers, even chieftains all scratched through the night. You twitch under your cloak, not from cold, but from a flea biting your ankle. You scratch, roll over, and another pricks your shoulder. Around you, others do the same. Their restless shifts ripple through the benches like a quiet tide. The hall breathes, snores, coughs, and scratches. In some ways, fleas were the true chorus of Viking nights. Here's a detail that makes you smile grimly. Double-sided combs are among the most common personal items found in Viking graves. One side had wide teeth for untangling hair, the other, fine teeth for catching lice. Picture a family gathered by the fire in the evening, not just sharing sagas, but combing each other's hair, flicking lice into the flames. Hygiene became bonding. Maybe someone teased their brother for hosting a flea circus. In his beard, laughter softened the indignity. But pests weren't just in hair. They nested in furs, wool blankets, even the seams of cloaks. Anywhere warmth and darkness met. In winter, when bedding rarely got washed or aired, infestations exploded. Later Scandinavian farm records even mentioned children joking about night fleas keeping them awake. Itching wasn't a nuisance to be solved. It was accepted as part of life. Did these pests affect health? Some scholars argue constant scratching led to skin infections or poor sleep, weakening resistance to illness. Others believe people simply adapted, their bodies and minds learning to endure. The evidence is inconclusive, but the very debate shows how deeply these tiny creatures shape daily existence. Now imagine the full sensory world. The smell of smoke and lanolin, the weight of furs, the faint sound of someone across the hall dragging fingernails down their arm. Even the animals brought their own insects indoors, cows and goats adding to the collective buzz. You might laugh in weary despair. The only creatures truly thriving in the longhouse were the fleas. And yet, people fought back. Ashes sprinkled into bedding may have acted as a primitive insecticide. Some later folk traditions mention stuffing pungent herbs like tansy or juniper into straw to repel bugs. Did Vikings do the same? There's no direct proof, but given their deep knowledge of local plants, it's entirely plausible. Imagine drifting off on a bed laced with crushed juniper, its sharp scent cutting through the smoke. Did it help? Or did it just make the itching smell nicer? Historians aren't sure. The emotional toll can't be ignored. Nights were never fully restful. Parents soothed children crying from bites. Couples whispered curses as fleas bounced between them. Even the toughest sea raiders, men who faced storms and swordplay, must have grown to the indignity of scratching like dogs through the dark. And yet, over time, fleas and lice became part of identity. Not something to escape, but something to endure together, like the cold, the smoke, the crowded benches. The pests were woven into the fabric of life. They reminded you, every itch, every restless turn, that survival wasn't clean or quiet. It was messy, communal, and stubbornly human. So you tug your cloak tighter, scratch one more time, and sigh. The straw crackles beneath you. The fire pops. Someone mutters in their sleep. And despite all, the fleas, the drafts, the snoring goat, you feel a strange kind of peace. Because in this smoky, itchy, breathing hall, you are not alone. You are part of a rhythm older than words. The nightly labor of staying warm, staying clean enough, staying alive. And sometimes that's enough. Combs were as necessary as swords. Fireside grooming, flicking lice into flames, untangling hair by emberlight, was as common as storytelling. To be Viking was to be itchy, and to accept that discomfort as just another daily battle against the cold, the smoke, the pests. None of these could be eliminated entirely, but all could be endured. So as you shift again under your furs, scratching your arm and sighing, you realize something deeper. The Viking night was a tapestry of imperfections. Warmth came wrapped in smoke. Companionship came wrapped in noise. Bedding came crawling with fleas. Yet people still slept, still dreamed, still woke at dawn ready to sail, farm, and fight. Sleep was never about comfort. It was about endurance. And in enduring, the Vikings outlasted not only the winter, but the biting fleas that feasted in its shadow. Tonight, the smoke curls thicker than usual, and as you lie beneath the hides, you sense something beyond physical warmth. For the Vikings, sleep was never just a bodily need. It carried weight in the world of spirit and superstition. The hearth, the furs, even the straw beneath you were infused with meanings that went far deeper than insulation. Warmth itself was sacred, a gift tied to gods, ancestors, and unseen guardians. Archaeological finds and saga passages hint at this invisible layer of Viking life. Small household shrines, carved wooden figures, and traces of offerings near hearths suggest the fire was more than fuel. It was a dwelling place for divine protectors. To tend the fire was to feed the spirit of the home. Each glowing ember symbolized life, not just heat. You imagine someone whispering a quiet prayer as they lay a log on the coals, asking Thor to shield the household from frost, or calling on Freya to watch over sleeping children. One well-attested belief was the connection between the hearth and the land vetter. Spirits of the land thought to linger around homes, rewarding care and punishing neglect. A family that kept the fire fed, and the hall orderly invited protection. One that let the hearth go cold risked misfortune. In this way, survival rituals were also acts of devotion. And then there's a charming detail from later Scandinavian folk traditions. People sometimes placed iron objects, knives, keys, small amulets, near children's bedding to ward off evil. Was this done in the Viking Age? The evidence is hazy, but it's easy to imagine a mother tucking her child between herself and her husband, then slipping a small iron charm beneath the straw, believing its cold strength will repel spirits of frost or disease. Scholars aren't unanimous on how formal these domestic beliefs were. Some argue they were quiet, everyday superstitions, passed down in whispers, never written, never codified. Others suggest they were woven into seasonal rituals, like Yule, when bedding was refreshed and fires ritually blessed. The truth likely lies in between, a fluid blend of practical acts and whispered prayers, unrecorded but deeply felt. The sensory world of this belief is vivid. Picture yourself lying on fresh straw, the fire crackling nearby, and hearing a grandmother murmur charms against frost spirits. Suddenly, the smoke isn't just an irritant, it's a shield. The furs feel heavier, not just with warmth, but with meaning, as though ancestors themselves press close through the hides. The night becomes a blend of physical endurance and spiritual reassurance. One fascinating archaeological clue comes from graves. Children buried with tiny fur blankets, adults interred with cloaks, even whole bedding sets laid beside them. Why take bedding into the afterlife? Unless warmth was believed to matter beyond death. To sleep eternally without furs or straw was unimaginable. This intertwining of survival and spirituality shows just how deeply the Vikings tied warmth to well-being, body and soul alike. Dreams, too, held power. In a smoky hall, half awake during segmented sleep, visions would feel vivid, urgent. Sagas often describe dream visitations from ancestors or gods. Odin appearing in the dark, a dead father warning of danger. Could the flickering firelight and drifting smoke have shaped these visions, making them feel real? A Viking waking from such a dream might share it with the hall at dawn, and the whole household would take it as guidance. In this way, even restless nights became channels to the divine. Some scholars even suggest that the very discomfort of Viking nights, the smoke, the pests, the cramped closeness, heightened their spiritual dimension. When the line between waking and dreaming blurred, the unseen world felt closer. Did the Vikings see frost not just as weather, but as a spirit pressing against the walls? Did every cold draft feel like a rival force to the glowing hearth? It's a question that straddles history and anthropology, and one that lingers in the smoky dark. Now place yourself in that mindset. You lie in your cloak, child curled against you, and hear the fire hiss. You whisper a few words, not because you fully understand them, but because everyone does. The words are a shield, like the cloak, like the straw, like the walls. Your warmth is physical, yes, but also spiritual. You believe it keeps danger away, and in that belief lies comfort. The Viking night was never just a battle of cold against fire. It was a negotiation between human endurance and the unseen powers of the world. The Longhouse became a sanctuary, not just a wood and turf, but spirit and song. Warmth was a gift, and in that culture, gifts always implied reciprocity. You fed the fire, and it fed you. You honored the spirits, and they shielded you from frostbite. So as you let your eyes close again in this imagined hall, smoke thick around you, you sense more than discomfort. You sense the invisible company of gods and ancestors hovering like shadows above the rafters, breathing warmth into the Longhouse. And you realize, to sleep in a Viking winter was not only to trust the fire and furs, but to trust that unseen hands guarded the night. The Longhouse quiets again, though never into true silence. Embers glow low, shadows stretch long, and you notice a quiet ritual playing out by the hearth. Someone crouches, stirring the coals, hands dusted in gray ash. They aren't building a new blaze. Not yet. They're tending what already exists, coaxing it to last until dawn. Charcoal, ash, and embers. These were the Vikings' tools for stretching fire through the endless dark. Without them, every morning would begin with the cold shock of starting from nothing. Archaeological hearths often reveal thick layers of ash, not just from burning, but from deliberate banking. Families scattered ash over glowing coals before bed, trapping heat beneath a gray blanket. At first light, the sleeper nearest the fire could push the ash aside, revealing a faint red glow, then feed it fresh wood. This saved precious fuel and spared the misery of flint and tinder every dawn. You picture yourself leaning over the hearth, ash smudging your face, carefully uncovering that tiny ember like a buried jewel. Later medieval sources confirm this practice was widespread across northern Europe, making it almost certain the Vikings used it too. The technology was simple, yet vital. In the north, every trick to preserve fire was cherished. Ash became a blanket for embers, and embers became a promise of survival. Here's an oddly practical twist. Ash wasn't just for banking fires. It doubled as a cleaning agent. Households rubbed it on greasy pots, or even used it as a primitive shampoo. Imagine crawling into bed with ash still under your fingernails. No, it was the same substance keeping your hearth alive. In the Viking world, nothing was wasted, not even soot. Now consider the sensory reality. At night, the hearth wasn't a roaring inferno. It was a faint, glowing snake of coals shifting red beneath its gray skin. You'd hear soft pops as sparks escaped their burial. See thin threads of light weaving through the ash. The sharp smell of char mixed with damp wool and musky fur. That faint warmth was enough to keep frost from biting too deep. To a Viking, those coals were as precious as silver. Specialists still debate how many fires burned at once. Some argue for a single central hearth, carefully managed. Others point to excavations in Greenland, where multiple burned patches suggest several smaller fires banked across the hall. Was this redundancy in case one failed, or simply the need to heat vast spaces? The evidence sparks ongoing discussion, leaving you to imagine both. A grand central ember dim for night, or scattered little hearts glowing faintly across the longhouse. And think of the human responsibility behind it all. Someone always had to wake in the night, to check the embers, nudge them together, add a pinch of fuel. It was a task never formally assigned, but always performed. Imagine a groggy man rising, breath clouding in the cold, stumbling to hearth to poke the ash. His muttered words join the chorus of snores before he collapses back onto the bench. Job done. These half-asleep guardians kept warmth alive, not with grand gestures, but with quiet, nightly acts of care. And in that rhythm of fire, faith, and shared vigilance, the Longhouse endured. Not perfectly, not peacefully, but together, through smoke, through fleas, through frost and dream and prayer. They held the dark at bay, one ember at a time. There's another curious note from the sagas. Occasionally, fires are described as dying in the night, leaving entire households scrambling to rekindle flames from neighbors. In those desperate moments, someone might trudge through deep snow, clutching a clay pot or a smoldering log, coaxing a borrowed ember home before it cooled. To borrow fire was both practical and deeply symbolic, a reminder that warmth itself was communal. Losing your heart didn't mean isolation. It meant leaning on the goodwill of others, another thread binding Viking villages into interdependent webs of survival. Now imagine yourself at dawn. The hall is still dim, shadows clinging to the rafters. The fire is banked low beneath a blanket of ash. You stir, teeth chattering, and shuffle toward the hearth. Ash crumbles under your fingers, and then with a small thrill, you uncover it. The faint orange eye of an ember, stubbornly alive. Carefully, you feed it dry twigs, then a split branch. The glow brightens. Smoke curls upward. And slowly, life rushes back into the hall. Around you, others stir, pulling furs tighter, grateful you've spared them the cold shock of starting from nothing. In that moment, you feel like you've carried a secret flame through the night, a fragile bridge from dusk to morning. Scholars still ask, how much did these longhouses consume? Some estimate several tons per household each winter, an immense burden requiring constant chopping, hauling, and stacking. The practice of banking embers under ash wasn't just convenience. It was necessity. Without it, fuel demands would have been unsustainable. Every ember preserved meant fewer trees felled, fewer hours swinging an axe in freezing air. But beyond practicality, there was an emotional weight to that ember. To wake in the dark and see its faint glow was to feel safe. It was proof the house was still alive, the family still cradled in warmth. Its absence would have been terrifying. Not just cold, but vulnerability made visible. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief each morning as someone uncovered that stubborn spark. So you sink back into your bedding, picturing the ash-covered hearth. It may not roar, it may not dazzle, but its quiet endurance matters more than spectacle. For the Vikings, survival was less about blazing fires and more about keeping a tiny ember alive through the longest night. That ember was a heartbeat of the hall, glowing faintly beneath its gray cover, a promise that even in the coldest dark, dawn would not come to an extinguished world. Yet not all Viking families relied solely on the hearth's long breath. Some experimented with tools and tricks to push back the cold even further, introducing iron braziers and oil lamps into their smoky halls. These weren't common luxuries. Iron was precious. Oil, rendered from fish or animals, was even scarcer. But in certain households, especially wealthier ones, these devices offered small, portable islands of warmth and light when the central fire faltered. Archaeologists excavating high-status sites have uncovered fragments of metal braziers, shallow iron bowls blackened by repeated use, filled with glowing coals. They could be moved around the hall, placed near children's bedding or beside elders who felt the cold most deeply. Unlike the fixed hearth, braziers were flexible, shifting warmth exactly where survival demanded it. Picture a weary mother setting one near her sleeping child, its faint red glow just enough to blunt the draft sneaking under the turf wall. Oil lamps, too, appear in the archaeological record. Small stone or clay bowls with scorched rims, their interiors stained with soot and residue, filled with fish or animal fat, lit by a simple wick. They gave off a trembling flame that offered both light and a whisper of heat. In Norse settlements in Greenland and Iceland, where wood was scarce, these lamps were essential through the long winter months. Their use likely trickled into Scandinavian homes as well, especially among those who could afford the fuel. The glow of an oil lamp wasn't bright enough to banish the dark entirely, but it softened it. In a hall thick with smoke and shadow, that small flame made the space feel less like a cave and more like a home. And for a child lying awake in the smoky dark, that lamp might have been more comforting than the roaring hearth. Its gentle light like a personal guardian, steady and close. Oddly enough, later folklore even suggests people believed lamps held protective power. A flame kept burning all night was thought to repel spirits, frost demons, and wandering souls. Was this belief already present in the Viking Age? Direct evidence is thin, but the continuity of the practice hints that it may have been. Imagine a family refusing to let the lamp die, not just for light, but because its flame kept unseen dangers at bay. In a world of howling winds and endless night, that faith may have been as vital as the heat itself. From a practical standpoint, braziers and lamps reveal the Viking willingness to layer solutions. They didn't rely on a single strategy. They combined them. Fire at the center, coals in a brazier, oil in a lamp, furs over bodies, straw beneath, all woven into a web of defenses against winter's grip. Each carried risks. Braziers could spark fires, oil lamps could tip, but together they pushed back the cold just far enough. Experiments with reconstructed longhouses even show that iron braziers often made the air worse, stirring up more smoke, increasing fire hazards. Modern reenactors sometimes cough and joke that Vikings must have had lungs of iron or desperation. You can almost picture someone dragging a brazier too close to a straw mattress, sparks flying, curses echoing in the dark. Survival and danger were never far apart. Scholars still debate how widespread these tools were. Some argue they were elite luxuries, reserved for chieftains or wealthy traders. Others point to simple stone lamps and occasional brazier fragments found even at modest farmsteads, suggesting broader use. The truth likely varied by region, wealth, and season, But the fragments prove this much. Some families slept with more than one flame watching over them. Now focus on the sensory layer. A brazier hisses as a coal shifts, sending up a thin thread of smoke. Its faint red glow illuminates a small circle, just enough for 2 or 3 sleepers huddled close. An oil lamp flickers, its flame guttering when a draft slips in, then steadying again. The smell of fish oil is sharp, pungent, clinging to wool and fur. But in that dim pool of light, fear recedes. Warmth creeps into stiff fingers. A child's eyes reflect the flame as the story winds to its end. So as you drift into this picture, you see the Viking longhouse not as a monolithic hall of smoke, but as a patchwork of glowing hearths. The hearth at the center, the brazier glowing by the bench, the lamp flickering near the door. Each flame held back darkness in its own way. Each spark was a quiet act of defiance. Survival didn't come from one grand solution. It came from dozens of small, fragile fires, carefully tended through the night. And when morning finally came, the embers, the lamps, and the braziers alike reminded everyone. They had endured yet another winter's night. It was never comfortable, never luxurious, but it was enough. And in the Viking age, enough was everything. The longhouse groans again in the wind, and you run your hand along the wall. The timber feels rough, heavy, solid, but it isn't just wood, it's clever carpentry, a kind of insulation borrowed from another Viking mastery. Shipbuilding. These people weren't only farmers and raiders. They were master craftsmen of the sea, and some of the tricks they used to keep water out of their longships also helped them keep cold out of their homes. Archaeologists studying Longhouse remains often remark on their ship-like qualities. The walls slope inward slightly, like the hull of a vessel, making them more stable against storms and the weight of snow. The roofs, layered with overlapping sods of turf, mimic the clinker-built planks of a ship, each piece overlapping the next, shedding rain and wind like scales on a dragon's back. It's a design echo, as if every Viking carried the sea home with them, not just in memory, but in the very bones of their dwelling. One well-supported detail comes from Greenland, where settlers built homes with double walls. An inner timber frame and an outer shell of tightly packed turf, earth, and even seaweed. Nature's insulation layered with ingenuity. In a land where trees were scarce and winters brutal, every scrap of warmth mattered. And so they adapted, innovated, and built not just shelter, but sanctuary. In the end, the Viking longhouse wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a living system of fire and fur, of straw and story, of shared breath and borrowed embers. It was architecture shaped by necessity, softened by ritual, and held together by the quiet, relentless will to endure. And as you lie there, wrapped in its smoky embrace, you understand. Survival wasn't heroic. It was ordinary. And in its ordinariness, its itch, its noise, its stubborn warmth, there was something deeply, beautifully human. The seaweed acted like insulation, dried kelp stuff between logs, an unlikely but effective barrier against the icy air. Imagine its faint, briny crackle as wind pressed against the walls, the salt-stiffened fronds holding warmth inside like secret. This wasn't random improvisation. It echoed another Viking craft, shipbuilding. Just as shipwrights stuffed oakum, moss, animal hair, and tar between planks to keep seawater out, so too did builders pack gaps in house walls to keep the wind from slicing through. The same hands that sealed longships against the ocean also sealed homes against winter. And here's a quirky detail that tugs at the imagination. Some longhouses may have been built with recycled ship timbers, what was precious in much of Scandinavia, especially in tree-scarce regions like Iceland or Greenland. When a ship grew too old to sail, its hull battered by North Sea storms, but its oak ribs still strong. Its bones might find new life as roof beams or wall posts. You could be sleeping beneath timbers that once carried warriors across fjords, that groaned under sail, that knew the taste of salt spray before they knew the weight of snow. The very structure around you might have sailed before it settled. Specialists still debate how deliberately shipbuilding techniques influence domestic architecture. Some argue the similarities. Sloping walls, overlapping cladding, tar seal joints are simply practical solutions that arose independently. Others insist the parallels are too precise to be coincidence. That shipwrights, the master craftsmen of their age, naturally applied their knowledge ashore. The archaeological record remains fragmentary, leaving the question open. But the idea is deeply compelling. The sea and the hearth were built from the same logic. Resilience through layered, interlocking design. Close your eyes and feel it. The inward-sloping walls embrace you like the hull of a beached ship. Snow slides off the turf roof just as water sheets off a deck. The timbers groan under wind the way planks groan under wave. The longhouse isn't just shelter. It's a vessel, not for crossing oceans, but for sailing through winter. It carries its crew not across water, but through the long, dark nights. Another fascinating link lies in caulking. Viking ships were famously sealed with pine tar and resin, a sticky, pungent substance that made them watertight. Evidence suggests the same sealants were smeared into the cracks of house timbers to block drafts. Imagine the sharp, resinous smell of tar mixing with wood smoke and lanolin inside the hull. To modern noses, it might be overwhelming, but to the Vikings, it was a scent of safety. The same aroma that kept ships afloat also kept children from freezing. Even ventilation shows its maritime influence. Ships needed airflow below decks to stay livable. Longhouses needed controlled airflow to let smoke escape without losing heat. Some reconstructed longhouses feature roof vents angled like ship hatches. Openable, closable, adjustable to the wind. Was this seafaring logic brought ashore? Scholars debate it, but the resemblance is striking. A Viking shipwright might have looked at a smoke hole and seen not a crude gap, but a hatch, another careful balance between enclosure and breath. And beyond function, there is symbolism. For a seafaring people, the ship was more than transport. It was identity, prestige, myth. To build homes that echoed ships may have been more than practical. It may have been cultural, a way of tying daily life to the sea, even for those who farmed inland. You can almost hear a Viking farmer, standing proudly before his turf-roofed hall, saying with a half-smile, "This house sails through winter." Now consider the experience of lying inside such a structure. The thick turf roof muffles the howl of wind. Double walls, timber, earth, seaweed. Trap warmth like a ship's hull traps dry space beneath the waves. You may still cough from smoke, itch from fleas, and jostle against neighbors, but you also feel secure. The house isn't just wood and sod. It's the work of craftsmen who knew how to bend nature to human need, who turned scarcity into strength. Scholars remain divided on whether this ship logic was conscious design or cultural osmosis. Some say builders simply used the skills they had. Others propose that the seafaring worldview infused everything, even sleep. Either way, the result was undeniable. Longhouses that endured storms like ships endured waves. So as you press your palm against the timber wall, you feel its grain, smell its tar, hear it creak. You realize you're inside a vessel, not for water, but for winter. A ship built not to sail seas, but to survive nights. And in that recognition, you grasp the quiet genius of Viking adaptation. The same hands that carved dragon-headed prows also built halls where families huddled through endless cold. The fire pops softly. Above it, voices ripple through the smoky air. Even in exhaustion, stories are told, and those stories leave clues. When historians and archaeologists seek to understand how Vikings actually slept, they don't rely only on post holes and charred straw. They turn to sagas, Eddic poems, and medieval fragments. Texts half history, half myth, that whisper of nights in the longhouse with startling casualness. One clear detail. Saga authors often mention the eldest, the firehouse or hearth end, describing characters lying on benches beside the blaze. These offhand phrases confirm what archaeology shows. Benches lined the walls. Sleep happened near the fire, and it was so ordinary it needed no explanation. Of course people slept in smoky halls. It was life. But sometimes the sagas offer sharper glimpses. In Erbigja's saga, for instance, there are scenes of gatherings where people sit late into the night around the fire, listen to tales, before finally spreading cloaks over benches and drifting off. You can picture it. Laughter fading, bows softening, bodies settling under furs as a hall quiets into a chorus of snores. It's the rhythm of night preserved in narrative. And then there are the poetic fragments. Skaldic verses describe halls filled with the smoke of embers or crowded with men beneath beams. These aren't just flourishes, they're sensory snapshots. Smoke thick enough to inspire metaphor. Benches so packed they became poetic motifs. Even in grand tales of gods and battles, the mundane reality of sleep slips through, one odd but telling detail. Heroes are sometimes described as sleeping with weapons at their side. Archaeology supports this. Swords and spears found in graves laid as if ready for action. In daily life, it may have been practical, a warrior keeping his axe or sword within reach, just in case raiders struck in the dark. Imagine lying on straw, furs pulled high, one hand resting on a hilt, comfort and vigilance side by side. Scholars debate how literally to take these accounts. Were they reflections of real habit or heroic embellishment by later scribes? Some argue sagas were written centuries after the Viking Age and romanticize the past. Others point to the consistency of small, casual details as evidence of authenticity. It remains a puzzle, where interpretation matters as much as evidence. Even supernatural elements in the sagas may reflect real experience. Restless nights are described as haunted, spirits whispering, ghosts pressing on chests, dreams so heavy they feel like hands. Were these just narrative devices, or echoes of what smoky, crowded, half-sleeping nights actually felt like? Anyone who's woken gasping in a drafty, coughing haze knows how easily dread bleeds into dream. Perhaps the sagas captured that disorientation more honestly than they intended. You feel it yourself now, half awake in the imagined hall. Rafters loom like giants. Firelight twists shadows into shapes that move when you're not looking. A child murmurs in sleep. Someone whispers a prayer to Freya. Another coughs, and the hall settles again. In that liminal space between waking and dreaming, it's easy to believe ancestors stepped down from the smoke to speak. Historians also use these texts to map social order. Seating at feasts often mirrored sleeping arrangements. The honor closest of fire, the lesser near the drafty door. A saga noting someone's place on a bench isn't just describing furniture. It's revealing hierarchy woven into every night's rest. Even in sleep, status dictated who stayed warm and who shivered. And consider the language itself. The Old Norse word saying bed rarely meant a frame or mattress. It referred to bedding, a bundle of straw, furs, cloaks spread wherever one lay. You weren't given a room. You were given a saying, a nest, a temporary arrangement, portable and shared. The vocabulary mirrors reality. Sleep was flexible, communal, never private in the modern sense. Scholars still argue over how much weight to give these literary hints. Some treat them as cultural memory, useful glimpses of daily life. Others caution that Christian scribes shaped many texts centuries later, filtering pagan reality through new lenses. Yet when saga details align with archaeological finds, benches, hearths, share bedding, the picture sharpens. You're left with a hall that smells of tar, smoke, and lanolin. Straw rustles under shifting bodies. Cloaks are pulled tight. Voices fade into snores. And above it all, stories rise of gods, of battles, of frost giants and sea serpents, while you scratch a flea bite and pull your fur higher. This is a sensory truth of Viking sleep, never divorced from story. It happened in the middle of them. As sagas were recited by firelight, listeners drifted off mid-tale, dreams blending with myth, warmth with vigilance, community with survival. Sleep was an escape. It was another thread in the fabric of a life lived loudly, closely, and always, always together. So as you roll onto your side, such stinging your eyes, you realize that sagas are more than entertainment. They're windows, however smoky, however distorted by time, into the way people actually lived and slept. They don't describe luxury. They describe survival, woven into story. And as you drift off, half lost in a haze of firelight and fatigue, you wonder, will tomorrow's storytellers remember you too? Scratching in the dark, muttering by the fire, just another body pressed into the longhouse night, warm, weary, and very much alive. Tonight, though, the hall feels almost festive. The benches aren't just filled with family. They're crowded with neighbors, distant kin, and even travelers caught by the early snow. A feast is spilled deep into the night, and the warmth it brings is more than emotional. In Viking society, Winter feasts weren't just about honoring gods or marking the turning of the year. They were a vital survival tactic. The fire burned brighter, the stew richer, the ale flowing freely, and all of it left bodies flushed, full, and ready to collapse into sleep. Paradoxically, a long house packed with revelers was warmer than on quieter nights. Human bodies, fed and flushed with drink, became living radiators. Archaeological evidence supports this. Some longhouses were far larger than a single family needed, true feasting halls, with wider hearths, deeper benches, and traces of mass cooking pits. The sagas echo this, describing banquets that stretched until dawn, songs shouted, boasts exchanged, meat devoured in staggering amounts. After such excess, sleepers would have been strewn across every surface. Men slumped against walls, women curled under shared cloaks, children tucked between snoring uncles, strangers dozing mid-sentence on the floor. One well-established detail is the importance of Yule, the midwinter feast. It wasn't just ritual, it was a practical explosion of calories and community at the darkest, coldest time of year. Eating heavily ensured strength for the lean months ahead. And when dozens gathered under one roof, their combined body heat could raise the hall's temperature by several degrees, enough to keep frost from claiming toes or fingers. You can almost feel it now, the air thick with warmth, laughter, and the lingering scent of roasted pork and spice mead. Frost still presses against the walls outside, but inside it's been beaten back by sweat, breath, and the sheer press of life. A curious tidbit from the sagas describes drunken guests toppling onto their cloaks near the half-burned logs beside the fire. No private quarters, no assigned beds, just communal collapse. Imagine waking in the night to find a stranger's elbow across your chest, or tripping over someone who dozed off mid-boast. The long house after feast must have resembled a battlefield of snores. Bodies sprawled in chaotic, sweaty comfort. Scholars debate how often such gatherings occurred. Some argue they were seasonal, tied to Yule harvest, or rites of passage. Others suggest that in wealthier communities, feasting was frequent, a way for chieftains to display generosity and cement loyalty. Either way, the result was the same. On feast nights, the hall became both warmer and noisier, a temporary shelter not just from cold, but from loneliness. Now let your senses paint the scene. The fire roars, spitting sparks high into the smoke-blackened rafters. The smell of roasted meat clings to beards and woolen cloaks. The floor is sticky with spilled ale. Music has faded into murmurs, then into the guttural rhythm of snores. The warmth is almost oppressive. Your cheeks flushed even as drafts whisper through cracks in the turf walls. You drift off not to silence, but to the fading hum of community. There's deeper comfort here, too. A hall full of guests meant more than heat. It meant security. Strangers sleeping nearby were allies for the night. Their presence made raids less likely, dangers more distant. The clamor of bodies wasn't just physical insulation. It was social insulation against fear. Oddly, later medieval Christian writers often mocked these feasts, calling the Norse gluttonous, drunken, chaotic. But behind the criticism lies a truth. Feasts worked. They reinforced bonds, filled bellies, warmed bones, and carried people through the harshest nights. What outsiders dismissed as disorder was, for the Vikings, another survival strategy, disguised as celebration. Reenactments in reconstructed halls suggest that, despite the noise and crowding, people likely slept better on feast nights. The sheer number of bodies in a sealed space raised temperatures enough that even thin bedding felt luxurious. Discomfort was tolerated because the alternative was freezing. Imagine now curling up on your straw mattress, cloak pulled over your head, while around you dozens breathe, snore, and mutter. Somewhere nearby, a man talks in his sleep, reliving a battle. A child whimpers in a dream. The fire pops. A drunk uncle groans. The hall shifts with the restless tide of communal slumber. It's messy, it's loud, and yet it's oddly comforting. You're carried by the warmth of food, the buzz of mead, and the nearness of others. As dawn creeps in, the hall will stir with groans and laughter. Stories will be retold, of who snored loudest, who spilled ale down their tunic, who tried to climb onto the wrong bench. The memory of warmth will linger longer than the hangover, because in the Viking world, nights like these weren't interruptions to survival. They were survival, dressed in song, soaked in mead, wrapped in shared breath. So you sink deeper into your furs, belly full, head buzzing faintly, and you understand the quiet brilliance of Viking feasting. It wasn't mere indulgence. It was insulation against the cold, against despair, against the crushing loneliness of winter. And in that crowded, smoky hall, you let the hum of humanity lull you into sleep. The embers glow low, and you notice a stranger curled not far from your feet. His cloak is travel-stained, his boots still caked with frozen mud. He isn't family, not even a neighbor, but he's been given a corner of the bench for the night. Hospitality wasn't a luxury in the Viking world. It was a law of survival. If a traveler appeared at your door in winter, you didn't leave him to freeze. You brought him into the smoky longhouse, shared fire and food, and gave him space to sleep, however cramped. The sagas are full of this custom. Visitors asked for a fire and seat as a matter of right, and hosts were judged by how generously they gave it. Archaeologists back this up. Many longhouses were built large enough not just for families and livestock, but for guests. The unspoken rule was clear. In the north, a closed door could mean death. A house that opened itself earned honor. A house that refused, it shamed its owner. You can almost feel it as you roll over in your bedding. The stranger exhales, his breath mingling with yours in the smoky air. His presence makes the hall warmer, though less comfortable. His snores join the chorus. His body heat adds to the pool of shared warmth. You might mutter about his smell, wet wool, road dust, old sweat, but you know you want the same kindness if you arrive half-frozen on a stormy night. One firm detail from saga literature is the idea of the gestastol, the guest seat, sometimes mentioned in Icelandic texts. Whether a literal bench or simply a designated space, it shows how central hospitality was. Even in the most cramped longhouse, some corner, however drafty, was reserved for newcomers. Here's a quirky side note. Some stories mention guests expected to share news in return for lodging. Hospitality wasn't just warmth and food, it was information exchange. Imagine lying half asleep, listening to a traveler whisper about distant markets, warring kings, or storms at sea, while children press close, wide-eyed, dreaming of lands they'll never see. A guest could bring warmth not just to the body, but to the imagination. Scholars still debate whether this generosity was purely altruistic. Some argue Viking hospitality was strategic. Reputation mattered more than wealth. To be known as a generous host meant allies in times of need. Others suggest it was pragmatic. Turning away strangers might breed enemies or curses. Either way, the longhouse became a revolving door humanity, where family, kin, servants, and travelers all shared the same smoky roof. Now, picture the sensory overload of such a night. You're already sleeping beside children, goats, and snoring uncles. Add to that a handful of travelers still damp from snow, their cloaks heavy with melting frost that pools on the earthen floor. The smell thickens, sweat, wet wool, manure, fish oil from lamps, the sharp tang of tar on walls, the sweetness of spilled mead. Bodies shift. Someone coughs. A dog barks in its sleep. The fire hisses as a log collapses into embers. It's overwhelming. It's chaotic. And yet, in this tangled web of breath and heat and noise, there's a profound kind of safety. You are not alone. You are part of a living system, fed, warmed, watched over, even by strangers. And as you finally drift into sleep, cheek pressed against rough wool, you understand. In the Viking world, survival wasn't a solitary act. It was a shared fire, a borrowed cloak, a bench made wider for one more. It was a quiet, relentless choice to let someone in, even when there was barely room to breathe. The benches are crowded, straw flattened by unfamiliar bodies, elbows and knees pressing into your ribs. Privacy, already a scarce luxury, vanishes altogether. Yet the warmth rises. The hall feels fuller, and the night, for all its discomfort, becomes survivable. There's even evidence from burial sites that some travelers were honored enough to be laid to rest with bedding goods. Furs, cloaks, even fragments of woven blankets. Perhaps their status as guests carried symbolic weight, linking the act of being hosted in life to being hosted in death. If true, it reveals just how deeply the idea of sharing warmth ran through Viking culture. not as a gesture, but as a sacred thread connecting the living, the dead, and the strangers who pass between them. Think also of the emotional balance. Welcoming strangers meant safety, potential friendship, news from distant lands. But it also meant risk. Was this man by your feet truly harmless? Did he carry sickness, secrets, or intentions less friendly than his weary smile suggested? Lying in the smoky dark, you might wonder, even as you shared your fire. Trust wasn't given freely. It was forced by necessity, tested nightly in every guest who laid his head on your straw. And here's a detail that might make you chuckle. Later medieval sources grumble about rowdy guests who drank too much and overstayed their welcome, as if Viking hosts sometimes regretted their generosity. You can picture the frustration, dragging a drunken traveler out of the hall at dawn, muttering that you should have left him in the snow. Yet the law of hospitality overrode annoyance. The hall was a lifeline, not just for kin, but for any soul who knocked. So you close your eyes again, feeling the stranger's breath and the shared warmth of the longhouse. His presence is uncomfortable, yes, but necessary. In the Viking world, no one survived winter alone. Hospitality was the thread weaving families, villages, and strangers into one fabric. It was noisy, smoky, crowded, but it was life. And as you drift into uneasy dreams, you realize the hall itself was less a house than a living network of survival, binding together everyone who needed its heat. The hall quiets again, but in your mind, you wander the graves left behind. Archaeologists digging through centuries of earth find not only weapons, jewelry, and tools buried with the dead, but also bedding, straw imprints, fragments of furs, tufts of wool, even whole blankets folded carefully beside a body. To the Vikings, the way you slept in life echoed into death. A grave without warmth was unthinkable. One of the clearest examples comes from the Oseberg ship burial in Norway, where two high-status women were laid on beds draped in rich textiles and animal hides. Though decayed, the fabric fragments reveal elaborate weaves and dyes, luxury bedding for a final voyage. But even ordinary graves often contain traces of wool and fur. It's as if every Viking, no matter how poor, was insured a bed for eternity. The logic is simple but profound. If warmth meant survival in life, it surely mattered in the afterlife. A dead child was wrapped in a fur blanket. A warrior was laid with his cloak. A woman was given her bedding, as if she might need to rest after the long journey to the other world. In these burials, you see the cultural truth that sleep and death blur together, both needing comfort, both needing warmth. Here's a curious tidbit. In some graves, archaeologists have found feathers mixed with wool, suggesting that down-filled pillows or mattresses weren't unheard of, though likely reserved for elites. You can picture the contrast. One man buried with rough straw, another with downy softness, both still chasing warmth, even in silence. Specialists continue to debate how symbolic these burial goods were. Were they meant literally, to comfort the dead on their journey, or were they displays of wealth, proof that the deceased had owned fine bedding? Some scholars argue for spiritual utility, others for social performance. As usual, the truth probably lies somewhere in between. But whether symbolic or practical, the message is clear. Bedding mattered. Furs, wool, straw, these were essential to identity as swords or brooches. The Vikings saw no separation between survival and meaning. The blankets that kept the family warm also carried them into the next world. Now imagine standing at a burial mound. The air is cold. Families gather to lay someone to rest. They drape him in his cloak, tuck a fur around his shoulders, maybe even spread straw beneath his body. The gestures are quiet, tender, and familiar. The same motions they made every night in the longhouse, now repeated one last time. To bury someone was to put them to bed, and to believe that beyond this sleep, warmth would still matter. Think, too, of the sensory echoes. The smell of lanolin and wool, the soft weight of fur, the crunch of straw under a still body, all reminders of nights shared in smoky halls. Funerals weren't alien rituals. They were extensions of daily life. The bedding that cradled the dead was the same that had cradled the living every night. One peculiar find from Birka in Sweden revealed a child's grave lined with birch bark beneath the straw. Scholars wonder, was this extra insulation a symbol of purity? Either way, It shows that even the smallest details of comfort carried into burial practices. The dead were not sent naked into the soil. They were wrapped as if for sleep. The sagas, too, preserve glimpses of this overlap. Warriors are described as lying down with cloaks pulled tight, both in life and in death. The same language bridges the two states, reinforcing the cultural idea that sleep and the grave were neighbors. Death was simply a longer night, one for which bedding was still required. And here's another intriguing observation. Many graves place animals near humans, horses, dogs, even cattle. Some interpret this as symbolic companionship, but consider the nightly reality of the Longhouse, where animals slept just a partition away. To lie beside beasts in death may have mirrored the closeness of life, when cow breath warmed the hall and goats bleated through the dark. Scholars still disagree on how much emphasis to place on this. Some argue bedding in graves was primarily about status, a way to flaunt costly textiles. Others emphasize spiritual symbolism, pointing to beliefs in a post-death journey that required rest and warmth. Both views carry weight. What's certain is that Viking burials show an unusual attention to the materiality of sleep. Now let yourself feel it. Imagine lying in your cloak, knowing it will one day wrap you in the earth. Imagine smoothing a fur over a child, aware that someday such a fur might rest in a grave. In a world where every night was a battle against cold, death itself was imagined as another night to endure. Warmth, both literal and symbolic, remained a great safeguard. So, as you curl again on your imagined bench, scratching at straw and tugging your cloak closer, you realize the Vikings didn't separate life, sleep, and death. All three flowed together, each shaped by the same furs, cloaks, and fires. To live was to fight the cold. To sleep was to fight it together. To die was to carry that fight into another realm, wrapped in the same bedding that once held you through countless nights. Tonight, though, the hall feels different, more restless, more unsettled. Sleep doesn't come easily, and you sense why. In Viking culture, the night was not merely a time of rest. It was a time of danger. Darkness was filled with uncertainty, with whispers of raiders' spirits, and dreams that might not be dreams at all. To lie down under your cloak wasn't just to close your eyes against the cold. It was to place your trust in the fragile defenses of wood, fire, and community. Sagas give us glimpses of this unease. Characters describe being kept awake by fear, rising in the night to check doors and fires. The Longhouse was never impregnable. Its walls of timber and turf could keep out frost. But what about thieves slipping to the dark? What about enemies who waited for families to sink into slumber before striking? One saga tells of raiders bursting into a hall at dawn, cutting down men still groggy from sleep. Nights were not always safe havens. They could be traps. Archaeologists often point to the presence of weapons near sleeping areas. Graves show swords laid at the sides of men and women, even children sometimes buried with small knives. This suggests weapons weren't locked away. They stayed close, ready to be seized at a moment's notice. Imagine lying down with a spear propped against a bench, its shadow stretching across the smoky wall. Sleep came, but lightly, always with one ear open for the crunch of snow outside. Here's a curious tidbit. Sagas occasionally mention dogs sleeping in halls as guardians. Their barks would cut through the night if strangers approached. Dogs weren't just companions. They were alarm systems. A restless growl in the dark might send a man's hand groping for his axe before he even opened his eyes. So even as warmth and family cocooned you, fear pressed at the edges of consciousness. Scholars debate how deep this fear ran. Some argue Viking villages were tight-knit, with neighbors close enough that raids were rare and nights mostly peaceful. Others insist the sagas reflect genuine anxiety, that violence could arrive at any moment. The disagreement highlights the ambiguity of the evidence. But whether fear was constant or occasional, it shaped how people thought about sleep. Not as surrender, but as vigilance. Now consider the sensory side of this fear. You're wrapped in furs, belly full, body warm, but every creak of timber makes your heart jump. A sudden shift in the wind, a goat's startled bleat, the soft shuffle of someone rising to relieve themselves. Each sound could be nothing or everything. Your hand drifts toward the knife at your belt. Your eyes scan the shadows near the door. Even in exhaustion, your body stays alert. This tension between comfort and caution is a heartbeat of the Viking night. You are held by warmth, yet never fully at ease. You rest, but you watch. You sleep, but you listen. And in that balance between trust and suspicion, between community and threat, you find the true texture of survival, not just against the cold, but against the uncertainty of the dark. The Longhouse offered shelter, yes, but it also demanded courage. To close your eyes in that smoky hall was an act of faith. In your neighbors, in your walls, in the fragile glow of embers that promised morning would come. And as you finally drift into sleep, half dreaming, half waking, you understand. In the Viking world, even rest was a kind of resistance. The wind shifts, rattling the roof boards, and for a heartbeat, you can't tell if it's a storm or footsteps. Smoke above the hearth twists into strange, shifting shapes, and your half-dreaming mind sees spirits in the haze. Then a cough beside you, familiar, human, brings you back. But it also reminds you how thin the line is between life and fragility. Sleep, when it finally comes, feels less like relief and more like risk. And it wasn't just human threats that haunted the night. Folklore brimmed with creatures of the dark. Trolls lurking beyond the firelight, Draugr rising from graves, spirits said to press down on sleepers' chests, turning dreams into suffocating nightmares. Sagas tell of whole households waking in terror, convinced they'd been visited by the dead. Were these tales metaphors for smoke-choked hallucinations? Or did Vikings truly believe their sleep was vulnerable to attack from the unseen? Historians disagree, but the sheer number of such stories suggests they colored the nightly imagination like shadows on the wall. Oddly enough, the smoke itself may have fueled these fears. Modern studies show that chronic smoke inhalation disrupts sleep, causes shallow breathing, and can trigger vivid dreams or even hallucinations. Lie in a longhouse, coughing, eyes stinging, lungs tight, the line between nightmare and reality blurred. A shadow in the rafters could easily become a spirit. A dream of suffocation might feel like a Draugr sitting on your chest. Night fear wasn't just myth. It was lived experience, woven from soot and survival. One peculiar discovery from Icelandic farm ruins reveals heavy doors with locking mechanisms, even in remote settlements. Some scholars argue this was to protect livestock, not lives. But the message is the same. Doors weren't just barriers against cold. They were defenses against intrusion. To bolt the hall at night was to admit that the world beyond the walls could not be trusted. Think of the emotional weight of that act. Every night meant balancing two truths. You needed to sleep, but you couldn't fully let go. Parents lay awake, one ear tuned to their children's breathing, the other to the wind outside. Warriors kept swords under their cloaks. Old women whispered charms to ward off spirits. Muttered prayers at dawn would come without disturbance. Sleep was communal, yes, but so was fear. Scholars still debate how this shaped Viking society. Some say it fostered toughness, a culture where rest was always half ready for battle. Others argue it bred cohesion. Families who slept close, trusted deeply, and faced vulnerability together became bound by something unbreakable. Both views may be true, and both help explain the fierce loyalty and resilience for which the Vikings became legendary. So as you lie again on your imagined straw bed, you feel the contradiction. Warmth on one side, fear on the other. The fire glows. Your family breathes around you, but your ears still strain for sounds in the dark. In the Viking longhouse, sleep was never just about rest. It was about daring to close your eyes in a world where danger pressed against thin walls of wood and turf. And every dawn was proof not only of survival against cold, but against the night itself. And then another layer presses in illness. For all the warmth of furs and fire, the longhouse was also a breeding ground for sickness. Smoke filled lungs. Fleas and lice crawled in bedding. Dozens of people shared the same damp, smoky air night after night. In this enclosed world, sleep and sickness walked hand in hand. Archaeological evidence paints a sobering picture. Viking skeletons show ribs deformed from chronic coughing, lungs scarred by years of soot. Living in a smoke-filled hall may have kept frostbite at bay, but it meant lungs rarely knew clean air. Imagine trying to sleep while your chest rattles with phlegm, coughing yourself awake every hour. A child wheezing in the corner wasn't a rare tragedy. It was a nightly background to life. Turf roofs trapped humidity. Moisture seeped through walls and bedding. In Iceland, archaeologists have found mold spores preserved in ancient turf, proof that the very structure may have worsened health. You roll on your mattress and realize it's not just fleas you're fighting. It's invisible fungi, bacteria, parasites drifting in the smoky dark. Here's a grimly quirky detail. Lice may have spread disease. Some researchers suspect typhus-like illnesses circulated in these crowded halls, passed from head to head during nightly grooming sessions. Picture a family combing lice by firelight, flicking them into the flames, not knowing they might also be flicking disease. The same warmth that bred closeness also bred contagion. Scholars debate how deadly this environment truly was. Some argue Vikings developed hardy immune systems and used herbal remedies. Yarrow for wounds, juniper for cleansing, angelica for fevers. A woman might scatter herbs in bedding or burn juniper as incense, not just to freshen the air, but to ward off bad humors. Did it help? Maybe a little, maybe only in spirit. But in a hall where smoke and fleas ruled the night, hope was another kind of warmth. One excavation in York uncovered latrine deposits teeming with parasite eggs, roundworm, whipworm, tapeworm. Imagine lying in the dark, stomach twisting not from hunger, but from worms writhing inside. Sleep must have been shallow, broken by cramps and discomfort. The Longhouse wasn't just a shelter. It was an incubator of ailments. And yet, people endured. A child coughed and still grew strong. A mother itched and still rose before dawn to tend the fire. A man wheezed through the night and still took his axe to the woods at first light. Resilience was carved into their very breath. Did they understand the cause of their sickness? Some sagas blame spirits or divine punishment. Others hint at practical awareness. Houses too smoky made people ill, so vents were adjusted, bedding refreshed. The line between superstition and observation blurred in the haze of daily life. Now feel the emotional rhythm. Parents worrying over feverish children pressed between them for warmth. Elders muttering prayers while coughing themselves to sleep. Neighbors whispering in the dark. Was this illness bad air or a curse? The night was a theater of survival, played out not only against cold, but against disease. You hear it now, the uneven chorus of snores and coughs. Some sharp, some wet, some lingering like ghosts. The sound tells the truth. This hall is not just alive. It is alive with sickness. But still, families cling together, sharing warmth, herbs, and hope. So you settle again under your cloak, breathing air that scratches your throat. You accept that comfort and sickness are inseparable here. The same walls that protect you also choke you. The same warmth that sustains you also breeds fever. In the Viking Longhouse, sleep was never simple rest. It was survival on a knife's edge, fought each night against both frost and disease. But tonight, as the hall groans under snow, you think less of smoke and straw, and more what this place truly meant. The Longhouse wasn't just shelter. It was the heart of Viking society, where every night sleep stitched families, kin, and strangers into a single fabric of belonging. Archaeologists note that longhouses were always central in villages, larger, sturdier, more permanent than outbuildings. They were status symbols, yes, but also collective anchors. Your place on the bench wasn't random. Nearer the hearth meant higher standing. By the drafty door meant lower. Hierarchy didn't end at bedtime. It stretched right into the smoky dark. And the Longhouse was never just a bedroom. It was barn, workshop, feasting hall, and sanctuary, all in one. As you lay in straw, someone sharpened a tool by the fire. A woman spun wool by lamplight. A child coughed. An animal shifted. Rest happened in the midst of life, not apart from it. Some sagas even describe disputes over sleeping spots, arguments about who claimed the warmest bench, whose cloak stretched too far. Imagine bickering in the dark while others try to sleep. It's almost comically human. Domestic squabbles echoing in the same rafters that had heard heroic boasts hours before. Scholars still debate whether this closeness bred loyalty or resentment. Did growing up pressed between relatives forge unbreakable bonds? Or did it fuel the feuds so common in the sagas? The evidence can't decide, but you feel the truth of both as you bump your cousin's elbow in the dark. Now pause and feel the full sensory tapestry. The crackle of fire is also the rhythm of storytelling. The itch of straw is a texture of shared labor. Harvest turned into bedding. The smell of smoke is a scent of ritual linking God, hearth, and ancestors. Even rest becomes a cultural act. In Iceland, archaeologists found longhouses extended over generations, sleeping platforms growing as families did. Imagine lying where your grandparents slept, knowing your children will lie here too. The continuity of place made sleep a thread in a generational tapestry. Later folklore even claimed that where you slept shaped your character. A child by the drafty door grew tough. One by the fire grew soft. Superstition, perhaps, but it reveals how deeply Vikings tied the material act of sleep to the moral fabric of life. So as you lie there, cloak pulled high, child pressed against your side, goats breathing softly behind the partition, you realize this isn't peaceful by modern standards, but it is profoundly human. Every sense engaged, every bond tested, every night survived together. The longhouse was more than architecture. It was culture carved in wood and wool, lived each night between sleep and waking. And so, as you let your eyes close one last time, you understand you're not just imagining how Vikings slept. You're imagining how they lived. The two cannot be separated. For them, rest was survival, community, identity, and continuity, all pressed into the smoky dark of the hall. The night stretches into its final hours. You felt the sting of smoke, the scratch of straw, the weight of furs. You share breath with children, press knees against relatives, listen to goats shift in the dark, and whisper prayers into the embers. To sleep in a Viking longhouse was to surrender not just to exhaustion, but to an entire system of meaning. Archaeologists and historians show us a world where nothing was wasted. A cloak doubled as a blanket. A goat doubled as a heater. A fire was both warmth and spirit. Bedding wasn't comfort. It was a survival toolkit. Straw refreshed with ash, wool cloaks, imported furs, sometimes even down for the wealthy. Every night was improvisation, woven from human warmth, animal presence, and spiritual trust. Sleep wasn't isolated. It flowed with meals, work, gossip, worship. A cough could wake the hall. A story could ripple through the rafters. A dog's growl could send hands to weapons. Privacy, silence, stillness, these are modern illusions. The Viking night was dense, layered, alive. And yes, it was messy. Fleas hopped across furs. Ale-fueled snores vibrated through benches. Children wriggled crosswise. Raiders sometimes burst through the door. It wasn't serene. But people rested anyway, because rest wasn't perfection. It was enough. Specialists still debate how well Vikings truly slept. Some argue for segmented rest, 2 or 3 cycles, allowing for fire tending and vigilance. Others suggest sleep was shallow, fragmented, leaving people in constant fatigue. But whatever they managed, it sustained them through voyages, harvests, and battles. Now close your eyes in this imagined hall. Benches creak with shifting bodies. The fire sighs under its ash blanket. A cow exhales softly. Beside you, a child twitches in a dream. Your partner pulls the cloak tighter around you both. You are wrapped in warmth that is fragile but sufficient. Above, smoke curls like a second ceiling, hiding gods and ancestors in its folds. Every detail is discomfort. Every detail is survival. The Viking longhouse was not just a building. It was a ship of the night, carrying families through storms of frost and darkness. Its walls were hulls. Its rafters, masts. Its benches, bunks. And by morning, if embers glowed and breath still rose, then the voyage of another night had succeeded. So you drift into the last dream of this journey, realizing the Vikings didn't beat winter with luxury. They beat it with closeness, ingenuity, and sheer stubbornness. Each night's sleep was a victory. Each dawn was proof that the system, imperfect, smoky, crowded, worked well enough to keep life going. Now let the longhouse fade. Let the smoke disperse. The fire softens into ash. Bodies stretch and stir as dawn's gray light seeps through cracks in the roof. You walk through every layer of Viking sleep. The straw, the cloaks, the furs, the coughing, the snores, the warmth of children pressed close, the vigilance of swords kept at hand. You've heard sagas whispered, felt pests crawl, seen embers coaxed to life under their blanket of ash. It was never quiet, Never clean, never easy, but it was life. Now ease into your own space. Your room may be silent, your bed softer, your air clearer than the smoky breath of a turf-roofed hall. But carry with you the lesson hidden in that distant world. Rest doesn't require perfection. It requires enough, asterisk, asterisk, enough warmth, enough closeness, enough faith that the night will pass and dawn will come. The Vikings endured with far less than you hold now. And yet they dreamed, they woke, they built, they sailed. So as your body sinks into stillness, let yourself feel the same surrender. The cold cannot touch you here. The shadows are only shadows. Every ember of your own warmth is safe, waiting for morning. Breathe slow. Soften your limbs. Let the hall of history dissolve into silence. Sleep well, traveler. The night carries you gently, and dawn will always arrive.